Welcome everyone to another ASPU Go event, a Global Migration Center at the Social Sciences University of Ankara. I would like to welcome you all. I would like to welcome the participants as well. Today our workshop title is A New Migration Crisis, Ukrainian Refugees in Europe and in Turkey. So we have two panels in the session, one in the morning session and the other is in the afternoon session. The morning session is until 12 p.m. and the afternoon session will start under the moderation of Filiz Aydın Hoca from the Political Science Department at 2 p.m. until 4:30 or 5 p.m. So we will give 15 minutes to each participant so that they can give their presentation, and then we'll open the floor for questions and answers. So today, this our workshop is devoted to displacement in and from Ukraine after Russia attacks Ukraine. And the morning session is about Ukrainian refugees in Turkey, whereas the afternoon session is about IDPs and refugees in Poland. So the war in Ukraine shows the world that war and displacement in Europe is not something of the past. It is possible today, in this day and age, that it is happening also in Europe. So it is perhaps the last wake-up call for the international community to tackle this global phenomenon once and for all. So when we look at the numbers, we see the sheer reality of affected populations. And of course, refugee situations or displacement situations is more than the numbers because every story is unique. Right? So, but if we look at the numbers again, in such a short period of time, we see lots of displacement figures, and the estimated total displaced in Ukraine is 13,686,000. And as of mid-May 2022, refugees fleeing Ukraine reached to more than 6 million. And main countries that Ukrainian refugees reside are immediate neighboring countries, but also in Turkey and Germany and even Spain to a certain extent. But when we look at the numbers again in total refugee influx from Ukraine in neighboring countries, in Poland we see almost 3.5 million people. In Romania, almost 937,000. In Russian Federation, also around 900,000. In Hungary, 600,000. Republic of Moldova, almost more than 500,000. Slovakia, 429,000. In Belarus, 27,000. And in Turkey, the numbers reach again in such a short period of time 124,000. We have also 8 million estimated IDPs within Ukraine as of early May 2022. So the war in Ukraine and the Russian aggression put a challenge on already fragile food security in many countries, be it in Africa, in Europe, Asia, since they're dependent on wheat and even sunflower in these two fighting parties. Plus, it is hard to sustain economy during a long war. World Bank statistics clearly indicate that Ukrainian economy and GDP will shrink by 45% in 2022, leaving many jobless, without pay and security even after the war. So if you'd like to bring a perspective to this new displacement, this situation is also a feminization of forced migration, since women and children are the most affected. But there are also other factors which I would like to emphasize under PAT factors. So what is PAT, or so-called PAT factors? Proximity, sense for P, and affinity, sense with F or A, and time, time factor. These three factors are important, which I'm going to mention a little bit. So proximity factor. The first step in forced migration is towards neighboring countries, usually. When we look at UNHCR reports, IOM reports, we see that most of the forced migrants and refugees, asylum seekers, live in neighboring countries. Like Venezuela, most of the Venezuelan refugees live in Colombia and other neighboring countries. Like Syria, for example, the country of origin, most of them, the Syrian refugees live in Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon. And when we look at Afghanistan, another protracted case, for example, we see that most of the time, they live in Iran and Pakistan and other, two neighboring countries. And Ukraine, most of them live in Romania, Poland, etc. And the second maybe thing to consider under proximity factor is that migration pressure is felt in neighboring countries, and maybe the first moves take place to neighboring countries initially, but it has also spillover effects. That means that people might move. It can be a step-by-step migration. So people might move from a neighboring country after a while to another country, be it Germany, Turkey, etc. And the second factor is affinity factor. What is affinity factor? It can be about cultural similarities, but also linguistic similarities, and how these two similarities, cultural and linguistic, play an effect in choosing a country of refuge. Also important under this affinity factor is the existence of social networks. I believe Anastasia, but also Yuliya can mention about this, why people are coming to Turkey, because the already existing diaspora networks or Ukrainian networks in Turkey, but also in other countries like Romania and Poland. And the third factor is the time factor. And the time factor, as the name suggests, refers to the durée of migration. And that is whether it is this migration is temporary or protracted. Most of the time, forced migrants wish to return once there is normalcy and their human security is assured in their countries of origin. That's a given. But as time goes by, even if the wars end, return becomes a myth. We see that in many, protracted cases. Even if they return, it becomes for a short while. This return migration is not a long migration, they might be exposed to another migration due to lack of infrastructure in the countries of origin, loss of livelihoods, loss of loved ones, loss of property, and the impossibility of starting all over again, and of course trauma that they experienced. So this temporary status also hinders, because in many countries, in different parts, temporary status or temporary protection is given to Ukrainian refugees, right? So like it's also given to Syrian refugees. So this temporary status also hinders the integration of refugees in the countries that they reside. The name temporary means, of course, you're expected to go away or go back. And even if they go back after living a couple of years outside their country of origin, most of the time refugees also face reintegration problems. And for the host society, the time factor put another strain by adding up social problems, by fueling xenophobia and racism. So if you add the number factor to this mix, to this time factor, number factor, the higher the number of refugees, the more the problems might happen in society, the problems will also multiply. So that means, as I said, the higher the number of refugees in any given country, the reactions that they might receive will only or might only increase. So despite welcoming attitudes initially, we have started to see, for example, negative developments and tension in Turkey against Syrians under temporary protection. And social media, which our participants will clear today, and social media is full of stories regarding reactions, negative reactions in Poland. Well, definitely there is a lot to discuss. Therefore, without further ado, I will first give the floor to our first speaker in this panel, and that is Assistant Professor Yuliya Biletska from Karabük University. And she's also the president of Ukrainian Association in Turkey. Welcome, Yuliya. And she's going to talk about Ukrainians in Turkey since February 24th, asylum seekers and forced tourists. Thank you, Yuliya. The floor is yours. 15 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to all the organizers and to Ankara Social Science University for taking this topic and developing this topic during the conference. First of all, probably I will just make some small clarification because sometimes I'm go emotional when I hear this about the migrants. You mentioned, thank you very much, and you give the detailed information about the refugees all over the world from Ukraine, and you also mentioned refugees that come to Russia. I would like to stress, first of all, that it's not the refugees in the classical understanding, because in most cases it's forced deportation. This is something very different from what we know that, when people flee the war and try to get some asylum in the country. Here's vice versa. Russia take these people forcibly, and they cannot leave the country. They cannot come back, or in some cases they even cannot move to the third country. So this is, they're kind of hostages in the country. So it's just small clarification before I start my topic. And as you mentioned, I'm also a head of Ukrainian Association in Ankara, and during this, since wars start in Ukraine, we manage in Ankara, at least our association is one of our key organization that manage refugee crisis in Ankara. That's why most of the stuff that I'm going to talk is from the field, let's say. So not very theoretical, but mostly practical information that we gathered during these 3 months. So I would like to share some presentation, just a second. Okay, so first of all, maybe just a very brief information before I start about the situation that was before the war. So how many Ukrainians we had, and how it actually changed. So before the war, we actually can talk about around 35 or 40,000 Ukrainians that was that live in Turkey, and this is actually the number of people who hold resident permit, official resident permit, and also because Turkish state, they do not provide any numbers of people of this Ukrainian region that got Turkish citizenship, protection, data protection, whatever. But we know definitely the numbers of residence permit holders, and if you can see for the years, it was like from 2014 until 2020, it's like between 40 and 70,000. More or less, the number is the same. If we are talking about the cities, the main cities that Ukrainians live was Istanbul and Antalya, almost 30%, and also Ankara, just like 9%, and other cities also is around 30%. So it's the division. But now, what happened after Russian aggression and after the war, the active phase of war started? We know that around 95,000 people crossed the border with Turkey. 95,000 Ukrainians crossed the border with Turkey. Again, this kind of semi-official information that we got from migration offices, they don't give the official one, the written one, but with words, they are talking about these numbers. At the same time, at least almost half of them actually left Turkey. So whether they came back already to Ukraine, or in most cases, at least in the first 2 months, it was a third country. So people fleeing Turkey, staying here a few weeks, months at least, and then going back. So now we are talking around 50,000 people. So what is the main location of in Turkey that actually accommodate Ukrainians? First of all, it's of course Edirne, because it's border city. Istanbul, Bursa, Eskişehir, Ankara, Izmir, Antalya, Alanya, and Mersin. These are the main actually cities where Ukrainians is living now. The main problem, of course, that because there is no actually way how to count them city by city until they got an official legal status. That's why it's, I mean, we cannot talk about the real numbers in the cities. Everything that we have, it's just like approximate and guesses from what we have of our applications form that they are applying for humanitarian aid or for school or for etc. That's why everything is estimation, and there's no any real numbers by cities until again they got the official legal status. Then we will see, probably it will be like in 1-2 months, we will see the real numbers in Turkey. So what about the profile of refugees? I mean, first of all, it's definitely, like I would say, more than 90% of people who came to Turkey, it's women, children, or elderly. I mean, first of all, yeah, because men from 19 until 65, between 18 and 65, they cannot leave Ukraine. And second, because actually most of the people really would like to join armed forces or territorial defense. I mean, that's why not even many people want to leave, mostly children and women. So who exactly, I mean, where they're going, why they're going here? First, because they have by somehow relatives who is living in Turkey. Generally, it's someone who married, who...
Yuliya, somehow your microphone is off.
Okay, now? So it's people who are married, working in Turkey officially or studying, so they are taking their relatives to them. The next like cluster, I would say, it's some kind of distant friends. Why? This is the most problematic actually group, because actually they're not small group, they are a huge group, and in this group especially we have many problems. When people, I mean, have some friends, they are coming to Turkey thinking that it will be great time to spend sometimes, or at least a very safe environment to spend these months waiting until war will finish. But in reality, it's not always the case. That's why especially we have problems with this second group. The next group is people with Turkish origins, and this is first of all Meskhetian Turks and Crimean Tatars. With this group, it was the I mean, semi-official or official procedures that, I mean, buses and groups were taken from Ukraine to Turkey. At least first 2 groups, mostly they were coming by themselves, by somehow crossing a few borders. But I mean, the third group, as what we know for now, it was official like procedures of organizing groups of refugees. The next group is people who are normally in Ukraine, they were working online. I mean, they don't have any problems with income. So they just want to live in, let's say, warm and relatively cheap country, I mean, compared to some Western European countries. That's why they choose Turkey as, I mean, anyway, I mean, for them, it doesn't matter which country to live because they have stable income and they don't need any special protection or special treatment as refugee. The next group is actually people who are trying to move their production to kind of business-friendly country. And I mean, some of them are choosing Turkey and try to move production from Ukraine to Turkey, especially if it's eastern or regions or Kiev. The production was based in eastern regions of Kiev. Definitely they by somehow choose Turkey. And the last group is people who are coming from occupied territories, already occupied territories. So this is, first of all, Crimea, and the second is eastern, let's say, regions like Kherson region. In that case, in this group at least, we have some men also, because first, mostly, again, these are women. And they try to escape first Russia, then go to Georgia, then to Turkey. Some of them stay in Turkey, but mostly Turkey is just their country to go to Western Europe, because they cannot leave Ukraine and go to Western Europe because Russia blocked the border and blocked the people moving to the mainland of Ukraine. That's why the only way they can go to Western Europe is through Turkey and through Georgia. So this is the main profile. Who are these people, let's say. And next. Okay, what about the legal status? How they actually can stay here. So we know that Turkey and Ukraine has this visa-free regime. That's why theoretically Ukrainian nationals can stay 90 days without visa. So as a tourist, yeah, so they are entering a country. When they're entering a country, they don't declare, and no one asks actually them, are you going to be a refugee or do you need any protection? And they just entering as a normal tourist. So Turkey, because it doesn't have any, at least Turkish government declare this, because they don't have, Turkey doesn't have any border with, a direct border with Ukraine. So that's why there is no special assistance to refugees who is coming from Ukraine. So the main question here is what to do after this 90 days. Already during the 90 days of visa-free regime, there are many social and other problems. I will talk about them later. But what to do after this? So first of all, I would say that during the first 1.5 or even 2 months, the Turkish government and Turkish officials were not accepting international protection applications from Ukrainians, at least in some cities. In some cities they were, I will talk about this also, but there were always rumors. I mean, when we come to the migration office and when we had some meetings, official meetings with the migration office, with other offices, official offices, they say, okay, just wait. We are waiting from the top decision that it will be some special status for Ukrainians in Turkey. So it will be kind of temporary protection as it was given for Syrians, for example. But after 2 months passed, we realized that there is no status, and they, at the end, they accept, yeah, I mean, we were thinking about this, but at the end, we decided not to give any special status for Ukrainians. That's why it will be the normal applications as for everyone else who is coming to Turkey. Doesn't matter, is it from Afghanistan or from Syria or from other country. And what is the biggest challenge in all this process? And I guess it's really kind of let's say, mismanagement, I don't know, or was it done for purpose? I still cannot decide, but it's huge misinformation in the legal procedures. So there's no, I mean, you cannot find any official information somewhere on website. I mean, you have to do this, this or that. Everything that is said, it's like in the private conversation with migration office, with head of migration office, and the biggest problem that from city to city, the officials say, and they actually share different and sometimes even controversial information. So, I mean, people really I mean, trying to understand what to do, and there are many misinformation, like around the internet, let's say, around the community, around the refugees. I can give the biggest example. I mean, still the biggest challenge, it's about the decision, will these 90 days will be prolonged until 180 days, so 90 plus 90. So many, even when the ambassador of Ukraine met, let's say, the head of migration office, they told him, yeah, we made such a decision that people who are exceeded these 90 days, they will not have any fines because of exceeding free visa regime. And I mean, okay, no worries. But in reality, when it comes to the implementation, some of them had these fines, some of them doesn't. So it's like, because there is no official information, an official order, or I don't know, any kind of document, public document. So it's just words that someone told to someone. And when the people crossing the border officers say, okay, you exceeded, you have to pay a fine. And they say, no, there is some decision. They showed me this decision on paper, and there is no decision on paper. It's like internal decision that is just on words. And this is really this misinformation. People don't know what to do. They don't know how to behave and what will be the next step. Another example of the huge misinformation is about international protection. It was like, it's not just the information that was shared somewhere on the internet, on groups or whatever. The migration officers at the beginning of this first 2 months, they were giving wrong information to people who were applying for international protection. For example, they were saying, if you apply to international protection and decide to leave Turkey, even with official canceling of this international protection, you will be deported from Turkey and you will be banned for entering for 5 years or sometimes 1 year. At the end, they accept that this is not true. I mean, that according to the law, that there is no such stuff in the law. But for the first 2 months, I mean, probably just because they don't know what to do with these people who are applying and they don't accept. So just to stop this application, they spread this misinformation. So, I mean, for me, it's a great example of how not to manage a crisis. I don't know, but again, we will see later what will be in the reality. And another challenge is different ways of law implementation in different cities, because we have Ankara, we have Istanbul, we have Bursa, Izmir, Antalya examples, and in each city, because we communicate with other associations who's also trying to manage this crisis, and we realize that in each city there's different application. In one, for example, in Bursa and Eskişehir, they were giving international protection almost from the first days of war, and in Ankara they start to do this after just 2 months of crisis already, when they had thousands of people here. So like this is also I mean kind of problem and a huge challenge general in Turkey. And it's very funny because if someone asks, I mean, why it's It's Turkey, you know, like, yeah, great explanation, but not the one that can be useful for the refugees. So, okay, what about the status list that these people can take? So first of all, as I already said, at least for Ankara and for Istanbul, for Izmir and for Antalya, when people try to apply for international protection, immigration officers, they try to pursue them that it's better to do short-term residence permit, touristic residence permit. So they know you're not refugee, you're a tourist. You know, like, so like you have to pay all the touristic fees here and then you can stay, no problem. So this attitude to refugees, not as a refugee, but as a normal tourist and trying to get some fees and some official procedures that usually tourists do, kind of strange as for me, but in the end, from what I know, at least right now in Ankara, international protection is given without problem, more or less without problem for Ukrainians, for Ukrainian nationals. Of course, it has some limitations. Like you cannot leave the country, you cannot leave the city. Of course, there is no any assistance, social assistance from state besides free medical services in state hospitals. So this is one of the biggest advantage, I would say, and that's why most of the people who came here and they don't have any options to go somewhere else, they applying for international protection. Again, this was huge misinformation from the beginning about, still from in some cities, there is a misinformation. And what is given right now is not the status or the final status. It's just a status, let's say, of person who applied for international protection. So what will be the final status? No one knows. And when this final status will be given is also no one knows, because theoretically after 6 months of application, it must be some kind of interview for the final status. But what we know from the Syrian cases, that sometimes state tries to make this final interview as so they are not putting this interview after 6 months. Sometimes people 1 year, 2 years living these temporary statuses. So will it be the status given, the final status given for Ukrainians like refugee or secondary protection? We still don't know. And what kind of status it will be given, don't know. When we ask migration officers and head of migration office, I mean, what it will be, tell us, well, then we don't know. Everything will be decided just particularly for certain cases. Okay, so there is no general policy, as we can see. But if we look to the law, it seems that secondary protection will be given for Ukrainians at the end of this process. And what are the problems with this short-term residence permit? It can be tourist, it can be humanitarian, and it can be family. Also, a huge misinformation about this humanitarian status, because it seems like humanitarian status, it's some free status that people can stay here for protection and without some limitation. No, it's just the type of short-term residence permit that is given in case certain documents absent, like passport or some other documents absent. So they also had some fees, maybe a little bit less than the touristic one, but at the end, I mean, if you want to stay in Turkey, you have to pay money, let's say. So yeah, I talked already about the main challenges, that it was forced. First of all, it was forcing Ukrainians to take this touristic or humanitarian permit instead of international protection status. And also another problem was that they took money for a long period and was took the fee for the 1 year, for example, and the residence permit was given for 6 months. And this, you cannot take back this money So like you're paying for state more than the state gives the services. At the end, like you can do nothing actually. There is official procedure how to take this money back, but even I myself couldn't do this. The person who is living in 15 years in Turkey and know Turkish very well and Turkish law very well. Now I'm still in the process of taking this money back from my mother, for example. And like just officials say, wait, another 6 months, maybe more, maybe someday you will get them back. Okay, and they also kind of, I wouldn't say that it's challenged, but also some issue that different implementation was done for to the regardless Meskhetian Turks and Crimean Tatars and generally Ukrainians, because Meskhetian Turks and Crimean Tatars mostly came here by groups, so the management of these groups was much easier, and the attitude of migration office to them was much, I wouldn't say that it was without problems, because there were some also problems, but at least it was better than the private applications in different cities. So also, it was some help on the state level for Meskhetian Turks and Crimean Tatars. It was some dormitories for them in Edirne, Bursa, and Eskişehir. Again, I don't say that Ukrainians cannot enter. I mean, the ethnic Ukrainians cannot enter these dormitories. No, they can, and they live there. But in the beginning, it was done for the official groups who came to Turkey, and for like private groups or for private families who came here, there was not such help at all. So everything that was done by a business, let's say, initiative. So like it was a hotel in Istanbul, who did, like some businessman just paid for this hotel in Ankara. In our case, also some businessman gave to our association a dormitory where we accommodate around 150 people actually. In Antalya, again, it was the same case. And the biggest problem in the accommodation sphere, that people who came to France, that I told the most problematic group, it's the people who host them usually do not understand the potential problem in the future. So like they accommodate them for 1-2 weeks, and then they just try to make them out, or sometimes throw away, or sometimes calling us and saying, can you take your citizens, because like we didn't think that it would be so big, huge problems, let's say. So for these groups, we actually try to manage all these dormitories and other temporary protections, temporary accommodations, sorry. So what about the next challenge is health, of course, because this 93 regime does not have any insurance. So people who actually are not tourists, some of them had some treatment in Ukraine, some of them had some illness and etc. They were cut off access to the basic health services. And this was a huge problem. Of course, this now the international protector status technically includes the health services, state health service, and it must include automatically. But what we have in the practice, it doesn't. So people have to go sometimes 4 or 5 times to migration office to make this work. I don't know why. And when we mention about this problem, migration office says there's no such problem. No, but in case of Ankara, each who got this international protection, they don't have this service, health service included automatically, and migration office refused to accept this problem. So this is also another. Oh, so what we did is like manual solutions. We managed to have agreement with UNHCR, and they provide us with Chankaya Polyclinic, and in case of, I mean, in really critical cases, people could use this polyclinic, which is actually great. But I mean, again, it's very manual solution, and there is no such solution in other cities as far as I know.
Yuliya, very good. But can you wrap up in 2 minutes, please?
Yeah, actually, I'm already almost finishing. Yeah. So there's also a problem with education because only 50% of people could continue their education from Ukraine online. So they cannot be enrolled right now in Turkish schools because they don't have any documents, because they don't have, they have language barrier. And again, is a manual solution. It was open some kind of schools for refugees in Ankara. Our association managed to do this, and also in Antalya. The another problem is return. So now, especially now, a lot of people are willing to return, but they cannot. They kind of prisoners in Turkey, not the real one, of course. Why? Because they entered with ID cards and all type of passports. So they can have this temporary, they need to issue temporary white passport, they call this. It's the return document. For this, in this case, they need visas from Bulgaria or Romania. And I guess Romania already canceled the visa, but Bulgaria still needs. So again, it's some, they need to spend money, time, and etc. to come back. And in case of children, if children came with grandmothers, aunts, etc., they cannot leave country. Only parents can come here and take them. So this is also one kind of problem. And of course, for now, there's no return assistance because it was some, let's say, free buses that took Ukrainians from Ukraine to Turkey, organized by government or some private initiatives, but no same initiative to going them come back. And for the last one is what Ukrainian Association did here. So we collecting humanitarian aid. There's like already more than 200 people received this aid. We provide some accommodation. It's dormitory for 150 people, and psychological support is guidance support like hospital, immigration office, administration, etc. With UNHCR, we managed to have this polyclinic, so like manually we solved the health problem. With International Organization of Migration, it was some legal support and children's activities. We managed to open Turkish courses in our association and also with municipality together. And in education, we opened the school for 70 people and also 20 for a kindergarten group for 25 people. So it's what we did already and what we continue to do. And I mean, we try to manage this with collecting humanitarian aid. So here's some information how you or any other people can help to manage this crisis, at least in Ankara. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuliya. That was most informative. Of course, you mentioned that you know the numbers are just guesstimates, right? And you also mentioned that, and it's good to know that this is a very diverse group again. You know, not a homogeneous group, but very diverse. Yet, you know, the women and children and the elderly consist. That comprises 90% of the overall population. But you also mentioned something we're also familiar, the very vague legal status, right? Which actually puts the refugees, Ukrainian refugees, in limbo. You know, they're already, in limbo, but another vague, because of the vague legal status and misinformation, is another problem, you said. Of course, this is happening because of very ad hoc policies or still not sure what to do. Of course, the issue of the problem of politicization of migration also, right? We are already dealing with other migration problems in the country, yet of course, the elections are looming near. So in a way, that's also the extreme politicization of migration issues, therefore ad hoc policies. But you also proved my point, the affinity factor, right? There are different procedures towards ethnic Turks like the Meshketians or Alska Turks and Crimean Tatars. And of course, since I'm not sure about this wake status, I can understand why this is happening, but because, Council of, Ukraine has become a member of the Council of Europe since 1995. Right? So since Turkey is accepting refugees from Europe, I mean, that's legal, actually. They should be considered as refugees immediately, since they are from Europe or Council of Europe member state. But I'm sure it will come up to a good solution in due time. Anyway, without, again, further ado, thank you, Yuliya, once again. Our second speaker is Fethi Kurtiy Şahin. Welcome, Fethi. He's a Ph.D. candidate and a research assistant at the Middle East Technical University. He has also publications in journals such as Communist and Post-Communist Studies, and Communist and Post-Communist Studies, and International Crimes and History, and several book chapters. Good for you, Fethi. And what is the title? Maybe you can tell us the title of your PhD dissertation also. And today, Fethi is going to talk about the situation of Crimean Tatars under circumstances of Russian attacks on Ukraine. And of course, we started focusing on recent developments here, but Russia invaded and illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula in 2014, right? And the Crimean Tatars once again became displaced after that. But it has a historical background also. So the floor is yours, Fethi. Thank you.
Thank you. Teşekkürler hocam. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this event that is highlighting this major event, in fact. And before starting my presentation, I also would like to remind you all that 2 days ago, we commemorated the 78th year of the deportation of Crimean Tatars from Crimea to the Central Asia by the order of Stalin. And in my opinion, the victims of this crime against humanity, I would say, must be underlined before my talk on the situation of Crimean Tatars people, which is also, again, facing serious persecutions, oppressions, and forced migrations amid this terror of war. In fact, after presenting Yuliya and her comprehensive presentation, maybe it's going to be losing of time, giving some more details about the experiences for Crimean Tatars in Turkey, and legally, I would say, because most of them also applicable for Crimean Tatar issue. But maybe it's better for me to give the background information, what Crimean Tatars are facing in Crimea and during the war, and why they're preferring to come to Turkey, or just starting the migrations to Europe or to stay in Ukraine. And my presentation is, in fact, I rely on the information from the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people, Crimean Tatar associations in Turkey, and also the briefs of the mission of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And I also personally been in Edin and Kurtiy during the first days of the migration, and I also had chance to observe and interact with the migrants and refugees coming to Turkey, and I also have close contact with the Crimean Tatar associations in Turkey, and so that I have some inner information regarding the situation. In fact, if we start to talk about the situation of Crimean Tatars in the Russian attack on Ukraine, it's better to also underline the occupation of 2014, because it can be understood as the first start, or the real start, or the first step of the war in the situation. That is why the analysis of the situation of Crimean Tatars should also cover the time period between 2014 and 2022. And since this occupation, Crimean Tatar activists faced many kinds of oppressions, attacks, and tortures. And according to the numbers of Crimean Tatar Resource Centers, which is NGOs established by Crimean Tatars, run by Crimean Tatars, and working in Kiev, and according to their numbers, since 2014, 243 political prisoners we have in Crimea, and 70% of them Crimean Tatars. 21 people were kidnapped, and 15 of them were Crimean Tatars, and 9 of them are still missing. And 58 civilians are killed in Crimea, and because of like just some political reasons, and 27 of them, almost half of them, are Crimean Tatars. And in addition to this, it was estimated that the number of IDPs left Crimea and migrated to Ukrainian mainland was between 30 to 50,000 in the first days of the occupation. There are some also estimations saying that 10 to 15,000 Crimean Tatars returned to Crimea. However, most of this population stayed in the mainland Ukraine. And we know that a minor migration wave started from Crimea and Ukraine to Turkey in these days also for Crimean Tatars. But those who stayed in Ukrainian mainland stayed also settled in Lviv, Vinnytsia, Kiev, Kharkiv, Odessa, Melitopol, Dnipro, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. And these names are getting much more familiar for our audience, I would say, because almost all of these cities are significant centers of war, today's war, in fact. As you know, Kherson and Melitopol are under Russian occupation. In these days, Odessa and Dnipro and Kharkiv are cities experienced serious clashes and fightings and bombings. And Kiev, it was one of the main centers of the fighting during the first phase of the war, I would say. And the Lviv and Vinnytsia, although they were far from the front line, but they were also suffered from bombings. And unfortunately, many of the Crimean Tatars living in those lands also needed to leave their settlements, and some of them preferred to come to Turkey because of the situation that they were facing in these lands. But unfortunately, we do not have accessible right now statistics regarding Crimean Tatar IDPs and refugees. But 2 days ago, a member of the Meclis of Crimean Tatars, Crimean Tatar people, Gayana Yüksel, underlined that there are 100 Crimean Tatar soldiers names she has, and the Crimean Tatar battalion was established serving in the Ukrainian army. But the others, the people for the living Ukraine, we do not have the exact information, in fact, the total numbers. Crimean Tatars, I would say, like I said, left their homes and settlements and to move to inner Ukraine, Western Ukraine, maybe. But some also, another also maybe tragic situation, Crimean Tatars living under the regions that Russian army occupied. There are also Crimean Tatars who did not have chance to leave their places, and they were trapped under Russian occupies. And especially the regions Kherson, Genetsk, Melitopol are very critical. These people are facing direct threat of oppression, repression, and also losing their lives during the war, also the war situation. And Meclis of the Crimean Tatar people indicated that according to the Ukrainian official numbers, more than 120 people only in Kherson are lost. We don't know where they are, and most probably they are kidnapped because of some maybe resistance or like against the war or just the Russian occupation. And some of these people are Crimean Tatars also. And Crimean Tatar activists living in Genetsk, Novoalexeyevka, which is also close to Genetsk. This region is the north of Crimea, is very close to the bordering regions of Ukraine. And Melitopol needed to run away, in fact, because of their activists, and they were resisting against the Russian occupation and war, and they were also holding significant projects and also organizing people against the Russian war, in fact. And we know that a couple of young activists also from Genetsk were arrested by FSB, and because of their activism again, and they were brought to Crimea, in fact, which is also, but technically they are being they were arrested in occupied land, and they are transferred to another occupied land there, and right now they are still being kept by the occupational forces. And we know that some Ukrainian citizens also from Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Donetsk region even are being forced to flee for Crimea by the Russian troops. And their passports are confiscated when they are moving into Crimea. And upon their arrivals to Crimean Peninsula, and their passports are taken and they are maybe settled in some camps and centers. And most of these people are not technically, in theory, they have a right to leave, but in practically they don't any like chance to live where they are living now. And also we know crime majors of the representatives of the majors of the crime Tatar people being abducted from these lands and also carried to Crimea. And also the situation in Crimea also is not that different. And since the 2014 also the picture was not great, but also after the war started, it changed a lot. And with the start of the war, the connection between the Ukrainian mainland and the Crimean Peninsula completely cut. Well-known activists of Crimean Tatars, and just they are receiving warnings from occupying forces about possible further arrests. And for example, Zahir Smedla, he is very significant activist among Crimean Tatars, and he is the head of the election commission of Kurtiy of the Crimean Tatar, Kurtiy of the Crimean Tatar people, which is a self-governmental institution of Crimean Tatars. And in fact, he was arrested once, and like again, some unlawful procedures were taken. And even in Crimea, also conscriptions and mobilizations of residents is being residents of Crimea constitutes a direct threat also for Crimean Tatars, and Crimean residents are being forced to serve in the Russian army, and most probably they are going to be sent to the front line that we are facing in the war in Ukraine. And just to sum up, this general situation in Crimea, in the mainland Ukraine, constitutes serious pushing factors, in fact, for Crimean Tatars to leave their settlements, houses, and also migrate to mainland Ukraine, and for most of them, if they can, to Turkey or other countries or Europe. Under these circumstances, it is estimated that a couple of thousands of Crimean Tatars left Ukraine and Crimea, and we only have exact numbers and information regarding the situation of Crimean Tatars moved to Turkey, I would say. And because in Turkey there are more than 40, almost 50 Crimean Tatar associations. Also, they are also the grandsons of the refugees and also the migrants came to this land. And these associations and activists are coordinating the migration wave of Crimean Tatars from Ukraine. Today, the headquarters of Crimean Association in Turkey, working with the migration office, as Yuliya underlined, also they are working with the Ukrainian associations and Ukrainian embassy to coordinate to be able to assist Crimean Tatars. According to their numbers, we know 930 Crimean Tatars came to Turkey, but the estimation is the number should be more than 1,500, and also maybe even more. But some of them I just came to their visit. They are living with their relatives, or just maybe they came before war and they just stuck here. And like there are many different situations, as you know. But as Yuliya underlined, the Turkey offered them a couple of options. In fact, if they do not have any financial resources and place to stay, they were maybe invited to apply for international protection. And under this status, they were given a place to stay, free healthcare, and 3 meals a day. But also this has some side effects. They do not have right to migrate and move in Turkey. They do not have right to leave their city of residence during this time period. And also now they are staying in Kırklareli, Bursa, and Eskişehir. There were groups living in Edirne, but the Edirne group also moved to Bursa and Eskişehir. And especially, but because these people were staying in the student dorms, and the next year also, you know, in Turkey, student dormitories was not that enough for even all our students. And so the migration office also were planning to move them to Elazığ, some groups, you know, in there we have some camps in Turkey, Turkey has, but Crimean Tatar associations are working to find other solutions if possible, because the Crimean Tatar groups do not want to leave there right now, where they are staying, and they are also trying to, with Crimean Tatar associations, if it can be managed, maybe new projects are being planned to give them other solutions to live in where they are living now. I want to give a very specific example, and this is an NGO called Kırım Ailesi, and like Crimean family. In Crimea, there's also Kırım Ailesi. This NGO was working in Kiev, and it constitutes a significant, very significant example of the situation of Crimean Tatars during the Russian aggression, even starting from 2014. This NGO was established by Crimean Tatars, IDPs in Kiev after 2014. This NGO works for cultural and education for Crimean Tatar children. And this NGO needed to move to Turkey after the war started. And the husbands and fathers of this group is in Ukraine, fighting in the Ukrainian army against the Russian occupation. And while the activist wives, in fact, and the children and all the members of the organization maintaining their projects regarding the education in Turkey, because if they moved here and also they are working with the migration administrations, and they are trying to sustain their educational projects, because Turkish do not have their own state, they don't have their own institutions of education and also state institutions, and they are these organizations are very critical for Crimean Tatars to protect their identities. But luckily, I would say in Crimea, in Turkey, in Turkey, there is a very significant population of Crimean Tatar diaspora we have, and they are also getting some assistance and working, coordinating and sustaining their also cultural projects and education projects. And this is, in fact, this is the very good example of Crimean Tatar history, even like migrations, repressions, under repressions, and also trying to reproduce generations and sustaining the identity and the no matter what's happening, they're just protecting their identity. And to conclude, I must admit that the circumstances of Russian attack on Ukraine is very threatening for Crimean Tatar people and their culture in Ukraine, even in Turkey, because the Crimean Tatar diaspora also do not have lost its connection with Crimea, which is their also motherland. And these people experienced long sufferings and oppressions, managed to protect their identity. And after 2014, they managed to establish new relations with the Ukrainian state to strengthen their place in the Ukrainian state. However, the Crimean occupation of 2014 and then the Russian attack of 2020 just brought changed all priorities and everything and every situation. And before concluding my words, I just remember all the victims of this war, and I hope we will see the days without war and blood in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fethi. Yes, so you talk about Crimean Tatars. You mentioned about the double, triple, or multiple actual displacement of Crimean Tatars in history, right? And also you talk about the recent situation, how they're trapped under Russian occupation, forced to leave, but also some forced to stay, right? And their passports were confiscated. In a way, we can easily say, I think, the policy of Stalin of getting rid of the Crimean Tatars, right, still continues to this day.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. But also you talk about the diaspora support. Since Crimean Tatars is long established in diaspora in Turkey and elsewhere, and how, of course, it's not a coincidence that the recent arrivals of Crimean Tatars in Turkey are resettling in Kırklareli, Bursa, Eskişehir, because these are the three provinces where the Crimean Tatar population already reside, and hence the diaspora support. You mentioned about this Kırım Ailesi, an NGO. It's so-called Family of Crimean Tatars, which is Kiev-based after 2014, of course, and how the protection of their identity, and also probably moving this identity to other generations has become a very important topic, definitely, for the displaced Crimean Tatars. Thank you very much. Indeed, that was most interesting. And now we give the floor to our third speaker and the last speaker of this morning session, Our third speaker is Dr. Anastasya Stelmat. She is from SGD'de Assam, and she's the monitoring and evaluation officer at this very important NGO. And so she completed also her PhD in METU in International Relations Department on energy policies in Ukraine. So today she's going to talk about humanitarian assistance to Ukrainian asylum seekers and the role of civil society. Anastasia.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here and to see all the familiar faces. I will try to be concise. I do understand that not much time is left, so some slides I will omit and not to repeat. I guess this is the most logical thing to do. And I hope it is seen. Is it seen, the presentation?
Yes, Anastasia, yes.
Okay.
And we can extend our time limit. We don't want you to cut it short.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem, because I saw that only 15 minutes left. That's why I was a little bit under stress. Okay, then nevertheless, not to repeat what was already said, I will try to fill in the gaps, what was not said, or to reiterate what is more important. So the presentation, my presentation will look like this. I will give a very short introduction of what is Assam, what are we doing, the function of the civil society organization in humanitarian assistance. I will talk more in detail about the Ukrainian response of Assam, so about the Ukrainians that arrive into Turkey, their main needs, about our contacts with the Embassy of Ukraine to Turkey, about our contacts with the Ukrainian associations. I'll talk generally more on the profile of Ukrainians that are reaching Assam and the assistance that we already provided. And then I will briefly talk about our further plans. So to talk about what is Assam, what do we do? Assam is the oldest NGO in Turkey and the biggest so far. We have more than 50 offices all around Turkey with more than 1,600 personnel working for the needs of the refugees. As you can see, we also have 2 representations in Brussels and in Athens. We work with our partners, our main UN agencies, UNHCR, UNICEF, UNFPA, UN Women, World Health Organization. I will not list all of them, you can see them on the slide. So this is the organization that in practice deals with all the refugees and asylum seekers since 1995. We do provide a wide range of services, including social services, legal counseling, PSS support, health counseling, education counseling. So it's really a very huge amount of services that we provide. Therefore, when the crisis started in Ukraine, Assam took the initiative to initiate this kind of role as the first organization that wanted to know more of the Ukrainians who are coming to Turkey and how we could help, because bearing in mind that we have a huge knowledge of how to deal with refugees, helping Ukrainians would also become a most important part of our job. Very briefly, I will not go into details, just to show why what is the role of the civil society organization in the humanitarian assistance. Civil society organization plays a role of a watchdog, of an advocate for change. It's important in the area of collecting data and accumulating knowledge. It's a service provider. It's important because civil society can raise funds and resources to reach those who are in need. It's important because also it provides the ground for the solidarity and cohesion. It also represents those who are underrepresented or marginalized groups in the society. And also civil society provides a capacity building for those who need such trainings, for example, from local authorities or smaller NGOs and so on. So I'll not go in details, just briefly, this is the map of what we try to do. I hope it is seen. Oh, sorry. What we did very briefly, we had meetings with Ukrainian associations, Ukrainian embassy, Presidency for Migration Management, local authorities. We conducted assessments, protection and needs assessment at the border and in Assam centers. We provided legal PSS, health counseling, education counseling. We also developing now currently projects to raise the funds and to reach Ukrainians in need. We also promote, as any civil society organization, fundamental and universal values and empower marginalized and underrepresented populations. And in the future, we're also planning to prepare capacity building trainings for Ukrainian associations, as well as we already issued 3 brief notes on Ukrainians arriving to Turkey. So this is just a very rough big picture to show what has been done. And now I will go in more details. We already mentioned the numbers, but I would like to a little bit update the numbers because we have, I guess, more recent numbers. As of 16th of May, there are 124 Ukrainians that entered Turkey, 79,000 left Turkey. It's important to say that many Ukrainians treat Turkey as a transit country due to the things that Turkey doesn't provide any protection, solutions for them. Therefore, but you can see how drastically the numbers were rising from 20,000. This was the first data that we received in the beginning of March to 124,000. For sure, it's important to say that in the country like Turkey, that is the biggest host of refugees in the world, it's very hard to drag the attention to 124,000 of Ukrainians that are entering because of the disparity in the numbers. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean that this issue is of less importance. What we are doing, you already mentioned about the Ukrainians that are coming to Turkey, their profile, therefore I will not talk more in details. Also, I will skip the legal status, but what will I will try to talk more about what we are doing in practice. Yuliya mentioned that there is lots of misinformation about what status is available for Ukrainians, and that there are different rumors. As you know, rumors are spread much more quicker than the correct information. That's why, for example, we collaborated together with Ukrainian Association, with Yuliya, and we tried to provide a more coherent information about the status. So this kind of information is very important. We do plan to also provide this kind of information in our call center that will be established very soon. And the call center will be addressing the needs of the Ukrainians. Information about the legal status is of core importance because without the legal status, Ukrainians that are coming to Turkey, they cannot access anything. Really, no access to basic needs, no access to education, no access to health services. Like if you don't have a legal status, really you are nothing. It's very important to stress it out here that Ukrainians that are coming to Turkey, they are not tourists, and therefore they are forced to, by the thing that they are affected by this misinformation, they're forced sometimes to apply for short-term residence. They are not coming here because of their own will, and this is really important. So it's important to bring, as they are in a very fragile situation and very easily manipulated by all this misinformation. Sometimes they're forced to pay very extra, financial expenses that are following, and not because they want, but because they think that this is the right thing to do. So one of the main things that we will try to tackle in the future will be this misinformation. We are already doing it in our centers, and it will be also done in our call center that will be established very soon. The other thing, very shortly, Yuliya mentioned Fethi as well, the shelter. The shelter is number one problem because people who are coming here, they do not have, in many cases, they do not have where to stay. These temporary shelter options, they are really not that many. They are very few, as you can see, the provinces where they are available. But these even shelter options will be exhausted in a very near time. Those hotels that were providing free accommodation in Antalya region are already not available due to the tourist season. Those dormitories that are provided now for Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians, they also soon will not be available. This is a very important issue. Therefore, there is a need to look for more durable solutions. And from you can see here, we just gave an example that the rent rates increased a lot. that the landlords, they are not that much eager to give these rents for short term. And sometimes it's a pity to say, but people are full, they are paying in cash for several months, and then they are unfortunately put away from that home. So there are many different cases when the shelter becomes a crucial number one problem that should be tackled immediately. And Assam sees this problem in the way that we developed a project where we will provide rent assistance. For sure, this is not a long-term solution, but at least for several months, if the rent assistance is provided, then the beneficiaries will have enough time to think what to do further. I think this is important to mention here. Cash, health, and education, many things were attached. So just to add here that I guess, which is very important, is the insurance. Health insurance is not available under the 90 days visa-free regime for sure. And many people coming with chronic disease, they face a very huge problem because they need to take some medicine on a regular basis. Therefore, Yuliya had the chance to get in touch with UNHCR, she said, and now temporarily we did the same with the Syrian crisis. We were trying to get these refugees who do not have health insurance into the Çankaya Polyclinic as a temporary solution. It worked for Ankara, but unfortunately in the other provinces, there are no options like this. So it should be also indicated here that unfortunately for those who do not have valid health insurance, it's very hard to pay the fees, and it's quite high. And this is the issue that should be addressed immediately. Education, for now, this is not like the very primary need that is immediately set by the Ukrainians that are coming, because some of them are already using this online modality. But I think this need will come more to the surface starting from September, because the children will have to continue their studies. And because of language barrier to be enrolled in Turkish school, this is more problematic, especially for children that are not in the primary school, but more older children. Concerning cash and food, just to mention, even though some Ukrainians have some savings, and so in some cases we can see that the savings stayed in Ukraine, and it's very problematic to take the savings from Ukraine. Therefore, when they come here with very limited cash savings, and it's already, we are in the third month after the war started in Ukraine, they are out of cash and they really need financial assistance. Just to mention also that we are in contact with the embassy of Ukraine, and we were provided with the list of beneficiaries that filled out the form that was available on internet and developed by the embassy. And according to the list, we had a chance to check that there were 1,500 individuals, and they answered that 72% of them plan to stay in Turkey till the end of the war, while the rest plan to stay up to 1 year. So we should fully understand that the majority of them, they would stay here for a longer time, even though they have the desire to come back to Ukraine if their homes were destroyed or somehow not very much suitable for living. They will be forced to stay even longer than presumed. And at that time, it is very important for them to have a legal status. I'm again coming back to this first question because it all starts with the legal status. As we know, Yuliya already mentioned, and we all know that most of the Ukrainians, they go to Antalya. Why? Because of the huge diaspora. According to unofficial numbers, we have around 20,000 Ukrainians there. We don't have the desegregation by province provided by migration agency. Unfortunately, why? Because they are not registered so far. Therefore, it's only the presumptions that we can do. So this is the graph that I wanted to show about this Ukrainians that filled out the form. As you can see, Antalya, Istanbul is followed by Ankara, Izmir, Mersin, and Muğla. And the needs that they identified in that survey were the first and the most was the legal counseling, and followed by the health services, and then the assistance, including food, cash, and accommodation, and then the border crossing. It's important to mention that the Ukrainians who were filling this form, not all of them were in Turkey at the time of filling the form, so they needed also help to investigate the options for crossing the borders. Meanwhile, and during this time, since 24th of February, we also had meetings with Ukrainian associations. There are 18 Ukrainian associations around Turkey. We tried to meet with all of them. This was, I guess, the first meetings with 12 organizations. It is important to mention from the observation that these organizations were not meant to tackle with a huge Ukrainian crisis in Turkey. So they were mostly established as a cultural organizations to gather on this kind of celebrations like Easter and Christmas and, different Ukrainian holidays, but they were not established to tackle their refugee crisis. So it's important that we realize that there is a huge gap in understanding how to help the Ukrainians who are in need, in even understanding the concept of the refugee, the needs of the refugees, the risks that they face. Therefore, as Assam has a huge knowledge in this area, it was decided that we will try to provide the capacity building trainings, especially on protection issues. So if they have Ukrainians coming to their associations and asking for help, and the association doesn't have the capacity to help immediately because they are mostly based on and acting in the name of the volunteers who are involved, that they could refer these people to our offices, and there we could provide them with concrete assistance. This is a very brief data that we wanted to share on the Ukrainians that are reaching Assam offices. So most of them reached from Istanbul, as you can see, followed by Izmir and Edirne. This is very limited data, I would say. Why? Because we do not have interpreters at the moment, so I'm the only Ukrainian working in Assam, but this will change in the near time. And I will tell it later about the details of how it will change. And these Ukrainians who reached Assam, if we look at their vulnerabilities, the most important and the first one is the unmet basic needs. Then it's followed by the lack of durable solutions, prospects, no access to services, single parents, single woman at risk, no legal documentation, child at risk of not attending school, family reunification, multiple displacement is very important issue because we have also Ukrainians who were displaced internally in Ukraine, spent some time in Ukraine, and then they spent some time in the neighboring country, and then they came to Turkey. So all this is causing a huge psychological effect on them. About it, I will talk a little bit later. So as you can see, what we provided mostly social counseling, followed by legal counseling and health and education counseling. We also provided help. We had a request from the PDMM in Bursa, and we provided assistance to Ukrainians that stayed in accommodation center in Bursa. So 250 beneficiaries were provided with clothes, 44 parcels of clothes were provided by textile producers. For some, it's much more easier to raise this kind of resources because, for example, we did some projects before with Inditex and we already have the connections with them. So whenever we reach them and we say that there is such a need, they do not question, they know that we are in the field and we have the information, they trust us and they immediately provide such help, which is quite of an advantage for Assam. Stationary needs were provided for 332 children residing in Bursa Temporary Accommodation Center. In Kırklareli, we had our Assam protection team. 92 protection interviews were conducted. And after these interviews, we provided necessary assistance or counseling, so medical assistance, shelter, travel assistance, hygiene kits. I would like to talk a little bit more in detail, if I have time, about the findings of these protection interviews. Do we have time?
Can you wrap in 2 minutes, Anastasia, please?
Okay, I will be quick. So as you can see, 6 main vulnerabilities we find out according to this protection needs. First is that most of, as men are not allowed to leave Ukraine. 85% of the applicants that come to Turkey, they are single women and single women parent. And, and in addition, the proportion of children among the newly arrived population is approximately 60%, whereas approximately 72% of the children are under the age of 12. So these numbers are quite high, and the risk of children who will not attend school is also very much high. Second one, unmet basic needs. Unmet basic needs is a very important vulnerability because it may cause some kind of threats like human trafficking or child labor. That's why the importance is to tackle this vulnerability in the first place. Serial medical condition and disabilities during this assessment, the applicants with serious health problems were observed, and some also staff realized that due to the unfavorable weather conditions, people who were crossing the borders were ill, and by not having a health insurance in the first place, it was very problematic how to help them with the access to health services. And there are also women who are pregnant and they need postnatal and afternatal care. There are people with physical and mental disabilities that need special care. Separated and accompanied children is a very important vulnerability that was identified because children are coming with their relatives without father, sometimes without mother, with grandmothers, sometimes even with some kind of friends who are bringing these children here. So for them to leave the country, it will be a very problematic issue. Person with psychological problems. It's important to mention here that most of the applicants that are coming here, they experience serious psychological problems. They fled the country due to the war conditions after the Russian invasion, so they were witnessing what was happening in Ukraine, and they really need a very solid psychological support that should be provided on a regular basis, not just one time. Otherwise, they will have consequences that will affect their life till the end of their life. So it's very important to provide it on time and for quite a durable time, that will help them to tackle these issues. And among other vulnerabilities, I would like to mention that there is a family reunification. Vulnerability is very important because those who are coming, they are coming not with the whole family, fathers, brothers, and male members of the family. They stay in Ukraine, same as many elderly people also staying due to their age. The other vulnerability is multiple displacement, what I already mentioned. So just to mention, Assam is trying to help as much as possible. So we took, for example, 12 children to celebration of Children's Day on 23rd of April. And our further plans, very quickly, just 1 minute, we will hire more interpreters, social workers under the project supported by ECHO. Counseling line will be opened. We will try to help Ukrainians so that could be able to contact us via telephone. We will provide all kinds of assistance through phones. Under UNHCR project, we will try to increase the number of interpreters and protection teams so they can go to the field, especially the borders in Edirne, as well as Ankara, Istanbul, Antalya, and Izmir, and they will try to tackle the needs of the Ukrainians there. And apart from it, we will continue working with Ukrainian associations and other local authorities to respond to the needs of the Ukrainians the best way. Sorry if it took too long. And these are the contacts. If there are more questions or you want to get more information, you can also reach us through this website. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Anastasia. It's important also to see from the standpoint of an NGO, and it's the longest serving NGO in Turkey, SGD Assam, for to help out the asylum seekers and refugees and other migrant groups. So it was important to see the role of civil society in Turkey in extending humanitarian aid assistance to Ukrainian refugees. So Anastasia also mentioned how it's a step-by-step migration, and Turkey is usually chosen as a transit country for refugees because of the lack of access to basic needs, right? And of course, the vagueness of the legal status. So the numbers that you provided, Anastasia, was a little different than Yuliya's numbers. So you said 124,000 Ukrainians. So out of this 124,000, how many of them stayed in Turkey? I mean, as far as you know.
So if you do the simple calculation, 79,000 left, so 45,000 stayed.
Okay. So more or less the same, Yuliya. 45,000 Ukrainians at the moment.
More
Ukrainian
or less.
refugees.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm asking Yuliya, so is it more or less the same?
Yeah, actually, if you calculate the difference, so it's like 45, 50,000. So the numbers different in general, because Anastasia has more updated numbers. I mean, my numbers is like 3 weeks ago, probably was collected.
But that's interesting because out of, that means like only one third of those people who came to Turkey initially stayed in Turkey. And that's also interesting. And of course, Anastasia also mentioned, the increase in rents and soaring prices, especially perhaps in Antalya. We see also on Turkish TV that it's impossible to find a house or affordable house or flat in Antalya anymore. But sometimes refugees are scapegoated, and we see that in the case of Syrians also in Turkey for the increase in rents, so soaring rental prices, for the loss in jobs or lack of jobs, available jobs. But of course, it's not the refugees doing actually, right? I mean, it's the landlords and those people who would like to use the misfortune of people as to their advantage. And education, of course, appears as a big challenge. I think that's also the biggest challenge in Germany, for example, but they're also waiting until September to find a solution to this. And of course, it's Anastasia also mentioned that the time factor. So if people are losing their houses, property, they don't have a place to go to, or their land or the place of origin is invaded by the aggressor, so how can they go back? So in a way, time factor comes, so it becomes a initially temporary migration. It becomes more protracted, of course, and as Assam Segedere is quite experienced, of course, in providing humanitarian assistance, but also legal support, but also psychosocial support, to tackle PTSD and trauma related cases. Well, I have questions regarding maybe vulnerable groups, unaccompanied children, because we know that there were thousands of orphans actually came from Ukraine to Turkey, and they're now settled in a hotel near Antalya, and they're well protected as far as I know. But how long, again, this, this hospitality can be extended, that's another concern, probably. So I have a couple of other questions, but having said that, I would like to thank actually all the participants here in this morning session, and we now open the question Q&A session. Maybe if I can take this advantage as the moderator and ask Anastasia and also Yuliya, I mean, can you actually share, if possible, that is, more information on vulnerable groups, especially unaccompanied children? Because Yuliya also mentioned that they cannot really, even if they want to go to other third countries, I mean, they cannot leave Turkey because they are, they came into Turkey with their grandparents, etc., and they need whole kinds of long procedures to leave Turkey. If you can, we can talk about these vulnerable groups. Of course, unaccompanied children are one, and orphans, but also another one is also, you know, female-headed households or women who are coming with their young children and who need support. And Filiz Hocam has a question, and Yevgenia Gaber has a question. You can actually open up your microphones and start asking your questions if you like. And then I asked my question already, and then when they pile up, the participants can answer.
Okay, I will go first. I just wanted to have a comment. We were very distressed to hear that crime in carried to Elazığ, I think, to kind of deprem kind of houses. But I think Turkish state has taken advantage of their diasporas because their diasporas, I know, have been spending a lot of time, you know, to a lot of money to improve the living conditions of, and they can do it. I mean, they can provide monthly assistance. But if the Crimean Tatar refugees are carried to Elazığ, you know, it's going to be much, much worse for them, because even now, if they need a doctor, you know, using their personal connections, they can take this person to a private hospital, right? Or they can ask a doctor friend, you know, to take care of them free. All these things that are, you know, unofficial things are very important. So I think the state policies should be kind of take into account these advantages. They should be near to their diasporas, these migrants. That's what I would say.
It helps the integration processes, right?
Yeah.
The integration, not only meeting their immediate needs.
Yes, psychological needs are more important. I mean, imagine you are in Eskişehir, that's one thing, that's your same culture, you know, same food. You can even go out and eat çiğ, right? Yeah. But Elazığ would be a lot more different, you know, culturally to adapt, even though, you know, they are both, you know, Crimean Tatars are also Turkish origin. And same with the Ukrainians, I think. They have to be located somewhere near to diasporas. That's psychologically important. My question would be, how are the relations? Do you hear anything about the relations between the Ukrainians and Russians in Antalya? Do you think there can be some kind of ethnic dissonance or clash if the war prolongs and if their stay prolongs, right? That could be another ethnic issue in Turkey, like we have this Kurdish issue and then Syrians, and now there will be asked this question to Yuliya and Anastasia. Did you hear about anything? And I was wondering also about the situation of scholars and university students. Do you think, do you have any numbers regarding if they can continue? Are there any applications to continue their education in Turkey? Because, you know, our rector, both for scholars and for university students. These are my questions.
Thank you. Good questions indeed, Filiz Hocam. Yevgenia, can you please open up your mic? And please introduce yourself quickly. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Yevgenia Gaber, foreign policy expert. Thank you very much for a great panel and for insightful presentations. My question will be mostly about public perceptions towards Ukrainians here in the Turkish society. Actually, it goes very much in line with what Filiz Hoca has just asked, because we are on the eve of the touristic season, and we know that Turkey is very much welcoming and inviting Russian tourists, especially to those places also like Istanbul and Antalya, where there are many Ukrainians. So I would echo the same question, but I would also add another dimension to this. We know that the perception of Syrian refugees have evolved somehow in Turkey. First, it was very welcoming because this is a key nation, also Muslim community and so on. But afterwards, due to some social, economic problems, domestic problems in Turkey, it turned out to be a bit of a burden for Turkish society. So what is your take on perception of Ukrainian citizens here in Turkey? Are they seen as victims of another aggression by Russian Federation or of NATO here in the region? they seen sometimes as taking more advantage and benefits from, let's say, European Union than the Syrian refugees? Because I have heard a lot of this argument, like, you have been treated much better than Syrian refugees are in the European Union, so we will take care of the Syrians and you go and find the shelter somewhere in Poland. So what's your take on that? And I would very much appreciate your insights from the people who are living in this country.
Very, very good, Yevgenia. Again, these are very good questions. What are the public perceptions actually towards Ukrainian refugees? Of course, the numbers are much smaller. You know, I mentioned in my introduction that the numbers is another factor. But of course, public perceptions, Turkish public perceptions regarding Ukrainian refugees. But also another very important point is, what is this Russian versus Ukrainian tension? Whether is there any? We know, I mean, that in fact some Russians are pro-Ukrainian, right? I mean, they're also rejecting the war, but also they're for the Ukrainian refugees. But of course, not everyone, probably. I mean, what have you heard from the field? Yuliya, we start with you first to answer these questions. Thank you.
Okay, so we have question about vulnerable groups, about potential crisis, ethnic problem, and about the perception. If we start with vulnerable groups, I mean, yeah, there are problems, especially with women and children who came here and they don't have like relatives or potentially friends, or some they coming, for example, for work because they met someone on internet and this person promised them a job or accommodation or whatever. And we had some problems like this. I personally was assisting for translation of these cases with police, with migration office. It was a case in Alanya, unfortunately. I mean, for now, we don't have like these problems in mass, but it's just started to appear, because in the first 1 month, it was not that obvious. And now these problems just come up more and more. About the returning process, this is a huge problem. For example, yesterday I was trying to assist a young, I mean, he's a child, he's a minor, he's under 16, he's 15 years old actually, who is trying to come back to Ukraine to his mom, because he came with his grandmother, and he couldn't do this. He went to consulate. Of course, consulate refused him to give any documents, and grandmother also cannot take passport for him because she doesn't have a right for signature. So like the only solution that right now is working is that mother or father came to Turkey and take this child with them. So, I mean, this is a huge, let's say, gap. So I don't know how consulate and other organization will solve this, but for now, we have this problem. And I mean, this is what...
Just to understand it, actually, Yuliya, sorry. So this 15-year-old boy wants to go back to Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. But he cannot do this.
Yes, I understand that. But is it safe for him to go back?
This is another question, because some of the cities, I mean, we also, actually, it was the first argument that I tried to pursue him, saying that, I mean, you know, it's great that you want to be reunited, because the main reason when I ask why you want to do this, to reunite with mother, because mother stayed in Ukraine and she cannot come to Turkey. She is working, she is involved in some military or whatever, so she cannot leave Turkey because she cannot leave Ukraine for Turkey because of some reasons. So, I mean, the safety is one of the questions. And some of the cities more or less safe. We cannot say that it's 100% safe, because like Russia bombing Lviv and other Western cities, not only Eastern and Kiev. I mean, this is kind of became kind of routine, you know, when Russia bombing Eastern cities, Odessa, Mariupol, Zaporizhia, whatever. But I mean, even the cities that considered to be safe, this is also not really 100% safe. So yeah, the safety problem already continues. But anyway, even these people do not have any resources to stay here, and they want to come back to have at least some help from Ukrainian state, because more or less the small assistance, there is a small assistance in Ukraine that people can get as an internal displaced person. But anyway, they cannot leave. So like they entered with the documents, internal documents, and with the same documents, they cannot leave. So this is a huge problem. You're right. About the situation with ethnic, potentially conflict between Ukrainians and Russians. I guess this is a Turkish biggest nightmare, because every time when we are trying to organize any kind of protests or events, the first that Turkish officials think, and the first they ask about, I mean, whether you have any problems with Russians, will you have any conflicts? Maybe you're willing to do any conflicts? But what I know from at least official organizations, they never provoke any conflicts for purpose. I mean, I don't have any evidence that Ukrainians wants to, I don't know, attack any Russians living here, or to do anything with them. Actually, at least from what I heard for now, I mean, even if there is a potential, but there is not really basis, let's say, the real basis for this, because the diaspora, they understand the Turkish, let's say, context. So they know this, that for Turkey, with all this refugee crisis, with all these minority issues, this would be a nightmare. That's why at least people from diaspora, they don't have any intentions to do so. The situation is different with newcomers, because they don't understand Turkish context. But generally, Ukrainian associations try to provide this information with them, share, and even, I mean, it was a cases for Istanbul protests when some of newcomers try to do something in different way than organizers of the protest. So organizers always try to explain them the context, what is the country, what is the politics of this country. So in the end, generally, these people listen to them. So until now, we didn't have any real huge problems or conflicts, or any conflicts that I know, between Russian and Ukrainians. And also,
yes, did you find any support among the Russian diaspora? I'm not talking about tourists, of course, you know, who come and go, but among those who are already staying here for a long term.
This is very, actually, the original Russian diaspora, they are mostly pro-Putin. So that's why, at least for Ankara, I don't know, in other cities, I believe it's impossible to have any support from them. We have kind of support from private people who are calling and asking how to help. And what we have also cases of support from people who fled the Putin's regime after the war. So these, I mean, they are not tourists, actually. They are also kind of refugees and political refugees, of course, not the case as it was for Ukrainians who fled the war. But I mean, from them, yeah, we had much bigger and much important support compared to the Russian organization, who generally work in very close relations with Rosgossотрудничество and Russian embassy. And actually, they are financed by Russian embassy in Turkey, so that's why they cannot say anything against their politics. So with these kind of groups, in total distance, we never try to have any contacts with them, and they also never try to have any contacts with us. So like we live in the two parallel reality, let's say.
Yeah, but the real problem might happen in Antalya, where the majority of the Russians live, right? I mean, Antalya especially. What about Turkish public perceptions towards Ukrainians?
I really thank you, Evgenia, thanks Evgenia for this mentioning of comparing Syrian and Ukrainian refugee crisis. It doesn't matter which conference, which public speaking I go, always any and every Turkish officials, when they start to talk about Ukrainian who coming Turkey, they always compare it with Syrian crisis. They always say, okay, we did this with Syrians, so like we experienced in some way, so like we can manage also for Ukrainians. But I mean, I don't know, will it be in reality? We will see. But the public, I mean, not officials, from the public, generally, for now, what I can see some kind of better perception of Ukrainians right now, of course, because of numbers, first of all, because what is most important, because state does not provide any kind of assistance for these people. So this is also an important factor. So, I mean, that's why I always saying that this decision is much political, not the humanitarian or any others. So I don't know, is it good or bad? In the one side, it can be good because it doesn't have this response from the society as the negative factor that can be the problem for economy, and especially now when we have such a huge economic crisis. But in future, probably the situation can be changed. Depends on the numbers and depends on the, I mean, what these people will do actually. For what I see now, they are searching for job, and more or less we have also people with qualified jobs, and we have many huge applications and like response from Turkish companies who say, okay, we are agreed to hire these numbers of engineers, this number of artists, this number of etc., etc., etc. There is, I mean, I couldn't say same for universities because Filiz asked about the universities. It was official information that YOG provided like some places and some opportunities for Ukrainian scholars who would like to continue their research in Turkey. But what I know from practice, it doesn't work. I mean, when people apply for university say, it's YOG's decision, not ours, so we don't know what to do exactly with that. So maybe it will be some mechanism in future that will, because it was just YOG decision and universities which doesn't know anything about it. So in practice, it wasn't working very well. For Ukrainian students, what I know that Ukrainian embassy had a meeting with YTB and they provided and they promised some extra scholarships for Ukrainian students who wants to study here. So this is a huge, and I guess this is a good development. I hope it will work and it will be better than the YOG's decision for hiring Ukrainian scholars at least.
Okay. I think, Anastasia, do you have anything to add to public perceptions, Russians versus Ukrainians, the tension or potential tensions or conflict areas, and regarding maybe vulnerable groups?
Yeah, sure. I would like to start with the orphans, I guess, because we both are aware of, I mean, Yuliya knows and I also know about the situation with orphans, but we didn't mention it in the presentation, not because it's not important, just because we forgot to mention it. The thing with the orphans is that now, as far as I am aware, there are 1,600 individuals that include 1,200 children and 400 caregivers that are currently in Turkey. Mostly placed in the hotels in Antalya and Sakarya. They were brought here based on the mutual agreement between two countries, two governments. But the problem with them is that these children do not have official status so far. It's under discussion with the Ministry of Family and Social Services. And again, if you don't have the status, all the problems arise. It's always like this. These children were accommodated in the hotels thanks to the initiative of businessmen who just took the initiative and established the fund Children Without War. And by the way, he also contacted our organization, and we will be trying to cooperate because his aim is to raise the funds within Turkey to help these children to meet their needs. So it's stationary things, food, and other needs that they have. So most probably in the near time, we will have some kind of memorandum of understanding, and we will be working together. What they plan to do, they plan to have some charity concerts. Last Sunday, Ruslana came to Antalya and there was a concert, and they are trying to collect money like this. On 5th of June, if I'm not mistaken, Jamala will be coming, and I think they will do it on a more regular basis. So every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, there will be some kind of concert. And this is the way how they are trying to raise some funds to support these children. I think the general target was that the amount of children was supposed to reach up to 3,000. But the problem remains the same, that it is expected that the Turkish government will give a special status to these children. And if there is a status, then all the rest will follow. Access to health services, access to education, and so on. Because the condition that they are staying now, just private hotels, is not 100% meeting the needs, because there are children with disabilities, children that need special care, and so on. We are aware of it. We, as Assam, communicated these needs to UNICEF. UNICEF is not involved, also searching for additional funds to support the children and to find a more sustainable and durable solutions. So, I mean, there is a move in this area, but it will take a little bit time with the decision, I guess so. The other question was unaccompanied and separated children. Not a lawyer, but nevertheless, to add up what Yuliya said, I guess if there was a caregiver coming from Ukraine, that caregiver should have had a paper, like official notarized paper, that would allow that caregiver to cross the border. And not everyone had it. Not everyone is able to get it now. And those who stayed in the areas affected by the war are not always able to prepare this paper and send it to Turkey. Therefore, the situation with these children is really, really vulnerable. And unfortunately, at this point, it's really hard for them to leave the country. Concerning the clashes, we also mentioned this in our brief notes, that due to the high Russian population in Antalya, and close by regions, these clashes are to be expected. I think it is inevitable. What we hear from the beneficiaries who are reaching our offices, they are complaining that one side is trying to put the guilt on the other and vice versa. So this is a growing thing which also needs to be treated immediately because of the tourist season. Lots of Russians, they have some summer houses in Antalya, and as we also have quite a sufficient population of Ukrainians there, we really need to pay attention to it. This will happen inevitably. Concerning perceptions, I wish I had the data to support it. So far, nothing, but this is a good point that Evgenia mentioned, and I hope that in the near time we will conduct such a survey that will support our assumptions. What I can only share my own things that I can observe in the field. With every refugee crisis, there is always like a curve. First, everyone has this empathy and treats you as a friend, tries to help. Then it decreases, and the interest is not that high as it was. So they more or less have the neutral one. But the more you stay in the country and the more you try to make use of the resources in that country, the more negative it becomes. So it's more or less in every crisis the same. The difference with the Ukrainians is that, for sure, I think it's not very much correct to compare Syrians and Ukrainians. Context is different. Profile of people coming is also very much different. It's very different crisis, very different situation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Therefore, I wouldn't say that this is very much correct thing to do. Nevertheless, what I would like to say that I think the general perception is not negative, it's rather positive, but it tends to be more neutral rather than actively positive to help, with the time passing, which is totally normal because people are coming to their daily life and, one cannot be helping nonstop. So this is the thing, what I observe in the field. That's all, I guess. But
Okay.
concerning the students, I cannot comment anything because I'm not in that area, so unfortunately.
Okay, great. Anything you would like to add, Fethi? Okay, then, we are already late. I would like to close this session, and we would like to see you actually in the afternoon session, which starts at 2 p.m. Today. And in the afternoon session, we will have, again, very important guests and speakers. And like, for example, Dr. Ege Hazar Gürsoy, research assistant at METU. He's going to talk about forced displacement in Ukraine from past to present. And Dr. Olena Malynovska, chief researcher at the National Institute for Strategic Studies in Ukraine. And she is from, she's still living in Ukraine. Değil mi Filiz hocam?
She's, I think, in Germany. Actually, she's here.
Oh.
I don't know if her mic is open.
I
think she's temporarily continuing her academic studies in Germany.
Oh, lovely. Yes. Hey, Olena. I didn't realize that. And then we have also another speaker. That's Dr. Marta Jaroszewicz, Center of Migration Research from Warsaw University. So we'll all be with you at 2 p.m. today. Anything you would like to add, Filiz hocam?
Yes, I maybe wrote them wrong. I just want to remind once again, Dr. Malynovska, our next session will start at 14, not 14:30. So it's 2 p.m., not 2:30 p.m.
Yeah,
Okay, so exactly almost 1.5 hours later.
Thank you. See you all. Thank you very much for your contributions, Anastasia, and Yuliya and Fethi. And hopefully we'll see each other again in the afternoon. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.
And they will talk us through the problems of Ukrainian forced migrants and IDPs. Our first guest is Ege Hazar Gürsoy. She just finished her Ph.D. here in METU in Ankara, and she has done extensive field work, first with the IDPs in Georgia, and also she participated in Professor Aydın here. His project in Ukraine regarding Ukrainian IDPs. So she is an expert on migration, and we will ask for her to provide us some background about the Ukrainian IDP migration issues from the perspective of a Turkish scholar. We don't have many people, right, specializing on migration issues in Ukraine. And we really, as academics, want Ukrainian studies to develop in Turkey. And we really hope Ege here and Kurtiy here will be in the future, will be the future experts on Ukraine and former Soviet countries, studies in Turkey. So I will first give the floor to Ege to learn more about how current migration relates to earlier migration patterns in Ukraine. And then secondly, I will also introduce Olena Malynovska and Marta Jaroszewicz when time comes. And Ege, you will have about, I think, 15 to 20 minutes for us to have time for questions. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Aydın, for your introduction, and thank you for inviting me. And before starting, I want to say that I will use the term refugee, even though I don't know if it is technically correct to call them refugees, but in the general literature and international press and the statements and documents of the supranational organizations, the term of refugee is mostly used. Also, I want to, after giving several factual information, but I'm thinking that everybody knows these factual informations about the current crisis here, but I will mention that anyway. I will talk about what happened during the 2014 crisis and what were the outcomes, as we saw in our fieldwork in Ukraine in 2019. Today, what can I say? How can I say? Okay. Today, IDP figures of the 2022 war is.
I'm sorry, Ege, did you want to share your slides or?
I don't have any slides.
Okay.
Okay. Today we are this new crisis has more IDPs than refugees, but the nature of the crisis seems to be more internationalized due to the host communities that are opening their doors to the Ukrainians. So there is a different, and the structure of this displacement seems to be more internationalized and more. It has. I am sorry, I forgot what I want to say. So besides international, another point is that the figures are counting in daily basis today's crisis, and these figures are exceeding the general population of many European countries. For this research, I was checking in daily basis the figures of the displaced population, and at the end of April, reports were suggesting that the numbers were around more than 12 million. In only 7 to 10 days, it became 13 million, and as of May 15, these numbers escalated to 14 million in a quarter. And yesterday, according to UNHCR reports, the numbers of the Ukrainians who crossed the borders of Ukraine were about 6.30 million, and a day before, on May 15, these numbers were 6.25 million, meaning that in a day, only in a day, 50,000 people added to the Ukrainian refugees. And these numbers actually indicating the border crossings from Ukraine, as you know, to the neighboring countries. So as Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia are Schengen countries, many Ukrainians are estimated to move onwards to the other Union countries, and also there are double border crossings from Moldova to Romania. And another important fact is that according to UNHCR reports, there are 2.4 million Ukrainians move beyond the countries that are neighboring Ukraine, meaning that today Ukrainians are spread to the other countries other than their neighbors, most dominated to European Union countries, they're also in Turkey and also in Caucasian countries, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Also some Latin and Northern American countries stating that there are Ukrainians came to their countries. Another dire situation of Ukraine that they are facing an overwhelming number of the IDPs, internally displaced people. And their numbers are actually higher than the refugees, which are, according to the International Organization for Migration, they published their 4th round, and it was published on May 3. And according to their report, there are slightly more than 8 million IDPs had to flee their homes within Ukraine. Also, another important remark here is that approximately 10% of these IDPs, these current IDPs, had already experienced displacement during the 2014 crisis, the Donbas conflict. So when we consider the fact that Ukraine's general population is around 41 million currently, excluding the population in the non-governmental control areas, we are talking about more than 14 million Ukrainians who fled their homes. It means that every 3 to 4 people out of 10 people in Ukraine had experienced forced migration. This is a very big number for a country. Another dire situation for Ukraine is that, according to IOM, International Organization for Migration, as of the beginning of May, another 13 million people are also estimated to be stranded in the affected areas, and they are unable to leave their places. So on the beginning of the March, to his speech to CNN International, IOM Director Antonio Vitorino described this crisis as the most dramatic crisis in Europe since the World War II. However, not long, only 8 years ago, as a result of the conflict in the Donbas region and the annexation of Crimea, IOM's regional director at the time, Argentina Sabados, made a similar statement, and she stated that the 2014 crisis was the largest displacement crisis in Europe since the Balkan Wars. So, in a way, the history repeated itself, but this current version is exponentially worse than the previous one, as the numbers escalated in a daily basis. So, what I want to talk about, what happened during the first displacement crisis, which started in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea and the conflict in Donbas. As you mentioned, with Professor İsmail Aydın and with Şegül Aydın under their supervision, we had a field research in Kyiv, Ukraine in 2019, and we published a book for the Turkish audience in 2020 about Ukraine, and my part was about Ukrainian IDPs. So we were in Ukraine after the 5th year of the beginning of the Donbas conflict and the annexation of Crimea. So, although the Donbas conflict was continuing at the time, it was somehow slowed down. And in comparison to the contemporary crisis, the situation was relatively stable. And even though this 5-year period is not a long time, it's not enough time to assess the IDP situation in a country, we still had some visible issues that affecting the IDP situation and some visible outcomes regarding to IDPs. One of the first issue was how this foreign aid and how this foreign funding was collected and how it was distributed. The second issue was what were the state policies for IDPs and how they were implemented. And the third issue was what was the socioeconomic condition of IDPs within their country and how was their interaction with the host community. So today still this protection cluster is functioning, but it's established in December 2014. And also there were flash appeals for funding Ukraine. And as of 2019, there were approximately 770 non-governmental organizations, international and local partners that were working under the roof of the protection cluster in Ukraine. And as many interviewees mentioned us, and we gathered also from the reports that almost all of the international and local actors were mainly operating in the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine. And in this context, the interest in Crimea and the Crimean IDPs were not so strong, and they were mostly neglected at the time, especially by the international organizations. And this was actually one of the most criticized topics by the interviewees who we had interviewed with, who were working on Crimea at the time. Another point of the international, the foreign operation in the field was about funding. Mostly IOM raised a significant amount, $5 million US between 2014 to 2020 for the use for the conflict affected population. And in 2019, when we were there, $70 million were collected by the Ukrainian protection cluster and non-cluster actors. But unfortunately, this was only the 30% of the needed financial support. So it only covered 30% of the assessed needs. Also, several NGOs who were not working in Eastern Ukraine were complaining about the fact that they were not accessing funding as much as those NGOs who were working in the conflict area, since IDPs were spread at all the regions in Ukraine. And another point was the distribution of the funding through which institution it should be distributed. Ukrainian government at the time passed a resolution which indicated that foreign funding should be distributed through the state, whereas international organizations were they wanted this distribution to be conducted by civil society organizations. So there was a conflict between the state and the civil society organizations on this issue, and also many NGOs operating in the field were complaining about that they were caught in the bureaucratic procedures, and there were high taxes for civil society organizations, so which caused them difficulty to provide adequate support for the people in need. So other than distribution of this funding, what Ukrainian state did, as you know, the rights of the refugees are under protection and guaranteed by several multilateral agreements and several international protocols, whereas IDPs do not benefit from a specific international legal framework, and this differentiates IDPs from refugees. And so the fate of the IDPs is solely dependent on their respective states. Generally, for various reasons, many states which face IDP problems fall short or they are late in enacting legislation to address IDPs, but Ukraine was not one of them. For instance, Georgia lagged this process. Georgia lagged during this process. Azerbaijan lagged during this process, but Ukraine immediately enacted two major resolutions regarding IDPs, Resolution 509, which was about the registration of IDPs, and Resolution 505, which was about the distribution of financial aid to the registered IDPs. Also, there was an IDP law was adopted by the Ukrainian government, and ministry was established for helping IDPs. So these were very positive prospects for positive things for the Ukrainian government, but there were also several criticisms regarding the Ukrainian government, regarding the implementation and some of the aspects of the legal framework at the time. One of them was IDP law. IDP law did not include non-Ukrainians in the first period, and also this resolution 509, which was about the registration of IDPs, stipulated the submission of official IDs, but many of the people left their houses without anything, without any official IDs or anything, or also there were also non-Ukrainians who fled from the region. So because of these criticisms, the law and resolutions were amended, and those who had permanent residence in Ukraine and who are non-Ukrainians were also accepted as IDPs, and any official document was also accepted by the state to be registered as IDPs. So it became better within time. Another problem was about this resolution 509, the registration of IDPs, was the fact that those people who only fled from the non-governmental control areas could apply this IDP status, which was at the time Donetsk and Luhansk. But many people also fled from the regions which were affected during the conflict, but these regions were at the side where the government had control. So they could not obtain this IDP status, so they could not benefit from financial aid. In 2022, this year, this resolution also was amended with this new crisis, and also still government limited the possibility to register as IDPs. It expanded this conflict-affected areas. So besides Donetsk and Luhansk, Kyiv City, Kyiv Oblast, Volyn, Zhytomyr, Zaporizhia, Mykolaiv, Odessa, Sumy, Kharkiv, Kherson, Chernihiv Oblast were also added to this resolution.
Ege, can I ask you to wrap up in 2 minutes?
2 minutes. Okay, okay. I will wrap up and I will regard many things. Maybe in Q&A session they can be asked about state policies. What experience, I can talk about what IDPs experienced during 2008 and 2014 conflict. As you can guess, the main problems were unemployment, low income, and accommodation. Generally, the IDPs had their unemployment ratio was higher among IDPs. Their income level was lower than general average income in Ukraine, and they also had accommodation problems, as it would be expected, because in Ukraine, if you're a house owner, this was mentioned during our interviews, also in the reports I saw it. In order not to pay income taxes for renting a house, the house owners generally do not want to sign rental contracts. But as IDPs officially registered as IDPs, they were constantly inspected by the authorities. So generally, the landowners, the house owners, were reluctant to rent their houses to the IDPs in order to avoid this tax income and rental contracts. Another point was that majority of the IDPs did not consider returning back to their places of origins. 50% of the IDPs were thinking that it was, an uncertain scenario to return back. 25% think that they had no intention of returning at all. 25% said that they would only return if the conditions would improve. So in a way, they were aiming to integrate, or they thought they already integrated their new places of residence. But for the host community, there were signs of some negativity. It was not high, but it was still visible, even in 5 years in Ukraine. 22% of the local people thought that IDPs created conditions like crowding living spaces, longer queues, increasing competition for employment. And 40% of the local people argued that local budgets should only be spent to the people who are real residents of their areas. 20% thought that IDPs should not receive any more financial aid from the government, and 30% thought that it should be provided to the only pro-Ukrainians, and this is an important point. So the society was perceiving perceived differently. They perceived IDPs differently. Those who came from Crimea were perceived more positively because, according to them, they had a political stance. They do not want to live under the oppression of Russia during the Crimean annexation of Crimea. And whereas these people who came from Eastern Europe were perceived as a mixture of both victims and perpetrators of the conflict in a way. And people thought that a majority of them were pro-Russians. These are what people told me during my interviews. These are not my observations, but their sayings. So it seems that the interactions, the society, the host community was differentiating a part of the IDPs from themselves. But I think it was because of the scarce of the resources were scarce, and the society was intent to have this kind of a differentiation between the IDPs. Also, the Eastern IDPs were about 1 million, whereas the Crimean IDPs were about 30,000. So this huge numbers are also affecting the perception towards IDPs. And I think today, these huge numbers will be a problem, not only for Ukrainian IDPs in Ukraine, but also Ukrainian refugees in other countries, especially the situation, I think, in Poland will be very alarming, considering the fact that they received more than 3 million people in their country. And also, one final remark that IOM, International Organization for Migration, conducted a research on May, and in this research, there are some ratios regarding discrimination against IDPs. I mean, it is very low, but it started only within 3 months, and it is an important point to remark on. That's all. Thank you very much.
Yes. Yes, Ege, thank you very much. This was really very interesting. I think this case study helps us, kind of provides us some guidance what can happen with this new IDP situation. But of course, the earlier situation is on a mini scale when compared to the current IDP crisis, which is about 7 million within Ukraine. So we always talk about refugees in Europe or Turkey, but actually IDP's number are much, much larger. And it is, as you said, it is kind of a not sufficiently addressed aspect of migration, right? Okay, thank you for this great presentation. Next, we have Professor Olena Malynovska. She's graduated from Taras Shevchenko National University, and she's a chief researcher in the National Institute for Strategic Studies. She has many articles on Ukrainian migration to the European Union, and her specialty is on the nexus of intersection of strategic studies and migration studies. She has also been in the Wilson Center, and currently she participates in several conferences about the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. And I think currently she is also in Germany. Maybe she will tell us more about her own situation with regards to war in Ukraine. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me gratitude the organizer for this conference for invitation to participate in it, and for support which our refugees obtain now in Turkey. As it was mentioned, according to estimates of UNHCR, more than 14 million of Ukrainians have fled their homes due to the war. And 6 million of them went abroad. I am one of them. I am now in Tübingen, and I'm very grateful for our colleagues who invite us, me and my husband, and me to the university. I am in the library of the university, where I have possibility to use literature, to use computer and communication and so on. So the problem of forced displacement is quite acute and quite serious for our country now. But it is very difficult to analyze it because the information is not enough, statistical data very unclear, and sociological savers are not representatives, as there are very few such surveys for today. Besides this, the situation is constantly changing. Military action continues, so the forced migration continues too. At the same time, some people, some displacement persons and refugees are returning home. Thus, we can only make some logical assumption about the process and its future. The main question which worries the Ukrainian society and the state is whether these people will come back to the country from abroad. The answer on it will depend on how long the war will last and how fast Ukrainians' reconstruction will happen. Currently, according to the various polls, more than 80% of refugees want to return. As of the middle of May, 1.8 million persons had already returned from foreign countries. But already now, the same surveys show that between 10 to 20% of refugees do not plan to return in the nearest time. Also, the vast majority of Ukrainians went abroad seeking security. Some of them use the opportunity to go to the more developed and richer country and plan to stay there and to integrate in their society. There are several factors which lead to the assumption that a notable part of refugees will not return home and that migration from Ukraine will intensify. First, it should be noted that migration is a rather inertial process, and it is greatly influenced by previous migration cases and established migration links. After the collapse of the USSR and severe economic crisis of 19th, migration has become a survival strategy for many Ukrainian families. According to our sociological data, up to 1/3 of population of the country had experienced labor migration abroad. Before the pandemic, up to 3 million Ukrainians worked abroad. That is more than 10% of working age population of the country. Because of COVID-19 restriction, 10 to 15% of migrants returned home, but most of them went abroad again at the first opportunity. Due to migration experience, language skills, and personal or business links abroad established by migrants, it could be suggested that labor migration will be an important strategy for overcoming aftermath of the war and raising funds for post-war reconstruction. The main reason of labor migration of Ukrainians always was the difference between salaries, level of salaries in the country and abroad. Before the war, it was the salary in Ukraine was 3 times lower than in Poland, 4 times lower than in Czech Republic, 10 times lower than in Germany. As a result of the war, the situation became far more worse. According to World Bank, Ukraine will lose 45% of its GDP this year. If the war will continue until the end of the year, economic problems will be more severe. According to estimates of International Labour Organization, there were 5 million working places disappeared in the country. So 5 million Ukrainians became unemployed. If the war will continue until the end of the year, the number of unemployed people could reach 8 million. One of the sociological survey conducted on the eve of the war, at January this year, showed that 54% of Ukrainians have no any savings, and only 11% have savings which will be enough to live without additional income for 6 months. So people will need to work in the situation of mass unemployment, and it is rather possible that they will find this work abroad. Another factor for the intensification of migration is a gradual expansion of migration behavior throughout the country. If previously 70% of migrants were from Western Ukraine, over time, more and more people from other regions started migrating. In the current forced migration, residents of the north, south, and east of Ukraine, most affected by the Russian invasion, make up the majority of migrants, of refugees, in fact. That is, the population that did not have migration experience before is obtaining it now. And this gives ground to assume that migration will intensify and many people from other regions besides Western Ukraine will participate in it. especially because the east, south of, and north of the country have been most destroyed, and they will need significant funds for reconstruction. Even if residents of east and south of the country did not flee abroad and has find more safer places inside the country, this mass replacement can result in increase of migration to the foreign countries. As it was mentioned that IDPs of previous period affected by the event in Donbass were in mass rather immobile persons. Predominantly, they remained on the east of the country, not far from their homes. According to sociological surveys, only 1 to 2% of these people were ready to go to work abroad. But today the situation is different. Most of IDP flee to the west of Ukraine, and the share of potential labor migrants among them may be much higher. First, the scale of the destruction which prevents the return to previous places of residence is much greater. Secondly, the western regions of Ukraine, which are relatively less industrialized and poor in land resources, have always been characterized by a surplus of labor and difficulties with employment, which will increase due to the arrival of large number of IDPs. And third, the experience of labor migration and migration networks abroad formed by the population of Western Ukraine can be used now by newly arriving IDPs. And besides the intensification of labor migration, could be predict the enrichment of its directions. Even after the in previous times, Russia was the main destination for labor migrants from Ukraine, but it gradually was losing its role. And at the eve of the war, Poland became the main destination of labor migration abroad. But now migration to Russia occurs only from the occupied territories and often by force. And even after the end of the war, it is difficult to imagine active migration to Russia. Instead, it can be predicted that most of Ukrainians will go to the West, to the countries that have proved their sympathy and supported Ukrainian refugees. And that will not be only European countries, because now we see that program of support of refugees of Ukraine implemented in many countries of different continents. That is Turkey, that is Japan, Australia, Brazil, USA, Canada, and many other countries. We can also predict that the length of stay abroad will increase. Before the war, the dominant form of migration was temporary, circular migration. According to State Statistics Service, up to 80% of trips for employment lasted less than 6 months. But gradually, the part of the temporary migration was transforming into long-term one. And this tendency intensified now. Moreover, European countries grant for refugees an annual residence permit, and Poland even residence permit for 18 months. And this is the time during which migrants can adapt in the host country, find a job, arrange studies of children, and so on. Already now, we see that some Ukrainians are rather successful in integration abroad. According to data from Poland, 25% of Ukrainian refugees of the working age already have found the job and work. I think that refugees who have families abroad, go to remote countries, have professional knowledge and skills to find a decent job, are more likely to favor permanent residence abroad. This is also a low probability of returning home among young people who will continue studying in the foreign countries. Another group of people who can decide in their favor of a long stay abroad are social assistance users. For example, families with a great number of children, as social assistance in Europe is higher than in Ukraine, far more higher. Women who opt to still stay abroad after the end of the war may be joined by their husbands. Thus, it is logical to assume that the number of migrants from Ukraine in foreign countries will increase. It may result in significant demographic losses, which may slow down the post-war reconstruction. Therefore, the creating of conditions for the return of refugees and IDPs should be the central task of the society and the state. The possibility of development of special return program is already being discussed. A subgroup has been set up within the working group of experts on post-war reconstruction to work on this issue. As there is an awareness that the right condition for return should be a proper salary, not less than in the neighboring Eastern European countries. The issue of liberalization of labor legislation and strengthening the protection of workers' rights are also discussed. The return program will obviously also include measures to attract remittances from migrants and diaspora. However, it is clear that the success of any return program is possible only with the end of the war, ensuring security and economic recovery of the country. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Olena, for giving us this all preliminary projections. I know the situation is in flux and this is the best we can get right now. So I agree with you that there has to be a comprehensive program for the return of these human resources to Ukraine, because Ukraine will need, of course, people for reconstruction and redevelopment of the country. And now we have Marta Jaroszewicz. She is an assistant professor at the Center of Migration Research, and she has already done several projects regarding Ukrainian pre-war Ukrainian migration to Poland and international migration in the EU. She has participated in several projects such as Horizon 2020 project, and previously worked for the International Organization for Migration, and worked as an expert at the European Commission on these issues. And her research interests include links between migration studies and security studies, migration policies in the EU's eastern neighborhood and Eurasian area. We would like to hear from her about the very curious situation of Ukrainian migration in Poland, because Poland was not known to be a migration country before. Even some politicians were anti-migration, but we see more than 3 million Ukrainians are so fastly absorbed to the country, right? So that's kind of a interesting puzzle for us. So we would like to learn more about it from Professor Jaroszewicz. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Aydın, for inviting me. Dear Olena, nice to see you again. We used to work with Olena a lot, right? With Professor Malynovska a lot in the past. Just maybe a personal comment at the beginning. I'm also working a little bit on Crimean migration to Poland. That's why I am really happy to be here. And I mean, we can discuss it later, right? It's rather a small migration group, but quite coherent, and like now they play important political role as well. So maybe, I mean, this is another topic for you. Maybe we could do something together on Crimean Tatars, which is very important.
Definitely, yeah. We have some contacts with some Crimean Tatars in Poland. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. So, and generally, I'm really glad that Turkey is looking at Ukrainian migration. Also, because we look at Turkey not only in sense of accepting now Ukrainian refugees, but also at the Turkish experience with integration of adaptation of Syrian refugees, right? So, for instance, in our center, we had few already seminars with Turkish experts on, for instance, on education issues, right? Because this is a very hot topic in Poland now, right? How to really quickly adapt our education system to absorb even up to 1 million children, right? Which is very challenging. So, okay, maybe, so because, you know, this is a topic that I work for 20 years, and I don't want to speak too long, so I prepared something. It will be very like general, but maybe it's better, right? And then we'll have maybe more times for questions and comments. So, but I need to start with that. I mean, to show what is happening actually. So, like everybody knows, but it's better to remind it, and I think we should remember that it's by invading Ukraine, Russia started really the biggest war of one state against another in Europe since 1945, right? And this is really an experiment. This is really a global phenomenon, and that we didn't expect. And of course, like our reactions are experimental because this is really the crisis nobody expected to happen. And by indiscriminate attacks of the Russian forces on civilian areas and infrastructure, strikes on protected objects such as hospitals and schools, the use of ballistic missiles and banned weapons, we witness also unprecedented escalation in violation of humanitarian and human rights laws, including executions, kidnappings, rapes in the localities where Russian army enters. Revealed at the beginning of April, mass graves of civilians murdered in the localities situated near capital city Kyiv may only indicate how dangerous for civilians is to remain on the territories occupied by Russia. Why I am saying that? I am saying that also because, yes, we lack statistics, right? It's true, we started doing some research, but one should also remember, and this is what I observe now, I'm quite active also in humanitarian assistance, so that, I mean, majority of the migrants that are coming, they have trauma, and they are vulnerable, and this is what we really need to be aware of, and how to actually make survey with them, how to talk with them, what questions can we ask, and this is also what we were discussing in our center at the University of Warsaw, but with others, I mean, with ethic boards, because what is our experience? Usually we did research on labor migration, right, which is quite different. Which is absolutely different from refugee migration, right? So, and also, I mean, it's I like personally, I think that every Ukrainian has a right to live, because it's not for us to judge whether he or she feels in danger, right? Whether she comes from Western Ukraine or Eastern Ukraine, because the whole country is at war, even if only Eastern Ukraine is mainly bombed right now, but 2 days or 3 days ago, there were heavy bombings in the Lviv area, so city that is very close to the Polish border. It was really 50 kilometers from the Polish border, right? So these are really tragic events that we witness. And in those tragic circumstances, as of May 15, 6.2 million migrants left, war refugees left, while to Poland, 3.3 million. And yet it doesn't mean that those 3.3 million people left in Poland are still in Poland, right? So the actual numbers of those remained in Poland are smaller. At the beginning, we didn't know much. Now we know more, because Ukrainian refugees are allowed to receive so-called PESEL, meaning registration number, and we've got statistics from this registration number. So around 1 million registered so far and received this number. We understand that these are people, of course, those people could have left as well, but like we kind of understand. We believe that if they are to receive this registration number, it means that they are more likely to stay in Poland than others. But we also did some other estimates. I am more a qualitative researcher, so I am now referring to research of my colleagues. So they believe that, as I can send you this estimate, so they believe that as of the end of April, the number of refugees who stayed in Poland could be estimated at 1.4, 1.5 million people. And why Poland? I mean, it doesn't mean that this is only one reason why Ukrainian refugees are choosing Poland. There are many. It's quite complex, but still quite also easily to be explained. So first of all, however, Ukrainian-Romanian border is the longest one in terms of Ukrainian borders with the EU countries, but still before the war, and it remains the same, Polish-Ukrainian border reported one of the highest dynamics of border crossing in the EU, meaning that it was a kind of traditional border for Ukrainians to cross, to enter the EU, and it remained the same after the war, right? And this is also what Professor Malynovska was saying. Like, generally, people are trying to use the same routes that they are using migration networks they had before, right? And this is like a natural reaction of migrants. And also what was very important is that quickly, even already on 25th of February, the Polish government transform all the border crossing points into pedestrian ones, which was very important because majority of migrants didn't have cars, right? While Hungary and Slovakia transformed only some of them or later. So most of them could cross the border on foot. One thing, and second, with the smallest number of documents, right? And not having international passports on internal passports, or even in some rare cases, like really with no documents, like de facto. As I said already, I would say that migration network theory can be particularly useful in shedding the light on the reason why majority of Ukrainians choose Poland, because as we know, there was a considerable community of Ukrainian migrants in Poland before. As Professor Malynovska was saying, they were mainly circular migrants, but this movement was like year by year transforming into more long-term one. And depending, because there is a lot of statistics, a lot of research, a lot of nuances, but let's say that up to 2 million Ukrainian migrants were living in Poland before the war. One should also remember that around 60 to 80,000 people left actually Poland, and these were mainly men who lived in Poland before the war to join the army or territorial defense, right? So there was a return movement as well. Yes, so people were coming to their relatives, to their friends. Also, there is maybe not huge, but traditional and very active Ukrainian minority in Poland that was very active in supporting Ukrainian refugees to come. And of course, there is language, cultural closeness. So, and this is very important. because the main feature of the current movement is temporality, right? I mean, temporary character. So this is very important for everybody remembers that men are not allowed men in working age are not allowed to leave Ukraine, meaning for women and children and to stay as close as possible to be able to come back, to return to their husbands and sons and so on. So this is the closest location. Okay, now maybe a few words, I don't want to speak too long, maybe a few words about the Polish reaction in terms of policies and so on, right? I would say that I would divide the Polish reaction into two phases, emergency one and a little bit stabilization one that we are countering now. And of course, Polish government was not prepared to such a big inflow, and actually to host such a and we are always saying, correct me if not, Aydin, that of course Turkey accepted 5 million refugees from Syria, but it took them longer. I mean, like it took a few years, right, to get this number, while in Poland it took only 1 month, right? So it was not possible actually that the Polish government, the Polish institutions, and they never had such a capacity to really organize everything. So it was mainly up to grassroots movement, right? Social solidarity. So everybody was helping, right? According to some, not everybody, but a lot of people were just private people, civil society, church, all the organizations, but also according to some sociological survey, up to 2 million people, private people, were actively really involved in assisting, right, refugees to come. So it means that, and this is good on the one hand and bad on the other hand, because majority of the people that came, that they stay in private houses. So generally, no collective center were prepared by the government, or only few of them, and majority of people are either renting houses, either they just stay at some people places, and this is crucial because we don't know how long the conflict will last, and already we can see that this is the problem before the summer. I mean, it's not comfortable, it's not good for either of the sides to live too long together, right? And one should also remember that in Poland we have huge problems with apartments, access to apartment and so on, right? So in this sense, it is good that this solidarity was enacted, but on the other, it's quite dangerous in the long term. What else? When it comes, when it comes to the legalization, legal issues, so there is a temporary. Everybody knows that there is a temporary protection directive that Poland applies as well. However, maybe Polish law is a little bit more favorable than this temporary direction. So the special bill was adopted, which gives Ukrainians access to social assistance, healthcare, access to labor market, education for children. But how it looks in practice? Okay, so apart from the problem with apartments, another important challenging is really schooling of children, because it seems that there are according to some statistics, there is as many as 700,000 Ukrainian children that came to Poland, while only 200,000 actually entered the Polish education system. I mean, it's a lot anyway. So, and it was not possible really to prepare any comprehensive answer. So there is no comprehensive answer. So meaning some of those children, they just enter Polish schools, just, normal classes, even without knowing language, right? Because the schools didn't have other possibility. They just entered, right? Some schools that were better prepared created special units, right? Preparation units for those children. But some schools, especially in Warsaw, because majority of those people, they remain in big cities like Warsaw. for instance, which our population of Warsaw that I live as well increased by 20%, right, in those 2 months. So it means that the schools are overcrowded, and the children, the schools cannot offer anything to those children, meaning that they stay on distance, they remain on distance learning. And the third option is that they remain in the Ukrainian education system. They just do distance learning in Ukrainian education system. So as you could see, there are at least 3 or 4 or 5 modes how children enter education system. Of course, it is temporary. I mean, there was no other possibility to organize it. But like since September, it requires really, and this is, I hope, what the government will propose, a more comprehensive concept how to address this issue. The third, maybe I will finish here issue. This is really the jobs opportunities, right? Professor Malynovska mentioned that 25% entered Polish labor market, but like I'm not sure whether it's a lot. I would say not really. It's rather a modest number. Like there were some estimates, people who, labor market experts were estimating that it will become quicker. Generally, Poland is having quite low, rather low unemployment indicators, right? But the problem is that there is a structural a problem with inclusion of those refugees, meaning women, right? Refugees, and with those professions that they have. So I think what we need now, I hope government will address it, is more structural approach, meaning also re-qualification, for instance, of those people, because these are generally what the Polish labor market requires. It's, for instance, construction, right? Construction, in industry, and so on, right? So I mean, it will take time, and it will require more organized approach. And also, what I am afraid of is, for instance, this discrimination of migrants, or illegal unemployment, right, which may also happen, right, and for instance, human trafficking and so on. So I mean, it will require further state reaction, but maybe before also health system the same, because health system was already, Polish health system was already at the kind of edge of being not resilient anymore, because we have structural problems with health system, right? So but finally, maybe I will conclude with saying that, as it was said, this is the temporarity, right? That is very important, because like majority of migrants, they do not wish to stay. They say that, like in those survey that we did already, and we are conducting very big one, but we don't have results yet. But at the same time, of course, they don't know how long they will stay, whether they will stay, but still, you know, time passes, right? So what we need now, I guess, this is really think of maybe everyday adaptation. I mean, we need to think of maybe middle term solutions, because those short term solutions, like for a few weeks, right, that you just, you know, stay and wait, they may not work anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marta. You really gave us a glimpse of how Poland is dealing with this, as you said, very sudden influx, exodus of Ukrainians. It is a huge task, and without civil society, I think you mentioned, it will be impossible to manage. We have less and less participants at this hour. I think since the morning there has been, you know, long sessions of the conference. I don't know if any of our listeners here, they have questions. if not, maybe I will ask some questions to our speakers. Dr. Malynovska, I was wondering, what is the role of the Ukrainian diaspora? Because currently I'm writing a paper on Ukrainian diaspora, because my own field is not migration, but more like diaspora and nationalism. So I'm wondering the older Ukrainian diasporas, right? We know a diaspora in, I think, maybe in Prague, a little bit stemming from in the 1990s, maybe, or other periods. Are they active, or even earlier migrants, right? How active do you think their role is decisive in, you know, helping the new refugees? And another question is, you did not mention much of the role of the European Union. Do you think, are there any extra measures that EU, you know, as a bloc can take? Maybe this is a question for both Professor Jaroszewicz and yourself. Let's start from here.
Thank you for your question. I think that the role of Ukrainian diaspora is very important, but not decisive. Ukrainian diaspora, I have my personal experience, as I said, and I would like to say that my elder daughter and grandson is in Croatia, and my younger daughter and my granddaughter are in Poland now. So I have the experience from three countries. My family is divided now between Ukraine, Croatia, Germany, and Poland. Professor Jaroszewicz already said that Ukrainian diaspora was very active, but I think that the decisive is the attitude of native population of the country of destination of our refugees, because in all these three countries where my family now have support, the attitude of nation population is absolutely. I can't find the words, because maybe the government is not so active or can't arrange necessary support for Ukrainian refugees, but people, yes. And this is very important for the feeling of Ukrainians here. And I think that it is at the same time is very important for their future plans for future, because they feel in the country of destination rather good, not as refugees, but the people as you see, the members of European family, and it is very important. As of European Union,
do you think people will be like be empathy fatigue as people became in Turkey? I mean, if it prolongs a few years more, don't you think maybe state should take kind of the burden from private people?
Yes, of course. It's very important how long the situation with how long it continue. Yes, of course, we all understand this. But at the same time, I already said that many Ukrainians rather good adapted there, and whether they will come back or whether they be here, this connection, these links It's very important for further development of Ukrainian society, I think, and for Ukrainian diaspora as well. You asked also my opinion about the activities of European Union. I think that it is not my sphere of competence, but as on the level of the European Union, both on the level of European Union and on the level of national states, the support of Ukrainian refugees is visible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How about Dr. Jaroszewicz? I mean, regarding the status of Ukrainian refugees, I mean, after this temporary residence status, do you think there will be a real permanent refugee and asylum possibilities? And for that, I think EU has to change some laws, because it did not accept the Afghans, although they were also under a lot of risk of war, right? So how do you think this legal status issue will be resolved for the Ukrainians?
Thank you very much. Of course, there are no extra programs like in case of Turkey. I mean, on the EU level, Turkey-EU agreement, there is not such a thing, right? I mean, so, some governments are complaining that EU does not do enough, but like Polish government, for instance, but they forget that they are already EU member state. And they already receive structural funds and other funds, right? So generally there is no new money, and this is the issue that the governments are all the time complaining about. Because what we lack now is really money, right? But the EU said that they are like too quite big, but still it requires time. That there are two ways of funding, for instance, social assistance or so for the refugees. One, like from the, as I said, cohesion funds, that unspent funds in the previous financial perspective could be spent on the needs of refugees, but it requires redirection. And the other, these are post-COVID funds, they are more easily to spend, but anyway, so meaning that all need to be rebudgeted. Right, and the governments of countries that are neighboring Ukraine are saying it's not enough. That the EU is behaving like normal, like in normal times, and this is also what the EU bureaucrats are telling us. Right, I mean, we cannot react really quickly. Right, so like now there is an issue of redirecting money, rebudgeting money, but it will take months, right? So maybe as the situation will be better in half a year, but for now, for instance, the Polish budget lacks funds, right? Because it requires a lot of bureaucracy to redirect funds. Also, what the EU did, apart from this temporary protection directive, as you mentioned, I mean, whether it was good or not to launch the temporary protection directive, it was the first time that EU actually did it, and this measure was introduced, correct me if I am wrong, in 2002, I believe, right? So meaning, and they were after Balkan wars, right? They were hopes that it could be triggered in 2015, but the countries didn't, during European migration crisis, the countries didn't agree, because they said that they are third safe countries between EU and the Middle East, yeah, for instance, Syria. But here, this is the first time when this is neighboring country. Right? So on the one hand, one would say that Ukrainians are treated better, that for instance, Syrians, Afghans, and so on. On the other hand, they don't have access to this real refugee package, yeah? Because this temporary protection directive, they give them only temporary protection for these 18 months and access on the temporary level. Of course, for instance, in Poland is a specific country, I would say not the richest one, but like in Germany, the benefits that refugees receive, social benefits, are higher than those that people may receive under this temporary protection directive. Yeah, but on the other hand, it's quite flexible and it is quick. Like if Ukrainians are to ask for refugee status, they would stay in this uncertainty for months, right, before they will accept. The other issue is, of course, there are people who were not, maybe this is what you were asking for, they were people who were residing in Ukraine, but were not Ukrainian citizens. Up to 100,000 of people like that left Ukraine.
Non-Ukrainian origin people, right?
No, non-Ukrainian origin. So these were, Olena may correct me because she did some research on Afghan refugees in Ukraine, right, in the past, I remember. But those who were coming to Poland, these were mainly citizens of India, citizens of what else? Some African countries, Afghanistan as well, Russia and Belarus. And it was quite problematic, I need to say, because it is written in this directive that, they will receive protection only if they cannot come back to their country. Yeah. So this is, I mean, it's not objective whether, you know, and this is up to the bureaucrats to assess whether their countries are safe or no, right? So there was some tension, and human rights activists were working, like were trying to convince the government also to change their attitude. But I would say also Uzbekistan. But I think majority of those people actually left. So left Poland, they don't remain, maybe some, and Nigeria, maybe some African citizens of African countries still remain in Poland. Afghanistan, I believe they left for Germany, but who stayed in Poland and they complain that it's not fair, these are, for instance, Belarusians or Russian citizens, right? Because they said they were also, especially Belarusians, they are also, or Russians who are oppositioners, right? They were also severely, they are in threat of like losing life or so on, right? They cannot come back to their countries because they don't support those countries, right? Political positions, but they don't have the same rights. It's true, they don't, right? They are on different legal status, in different legal status.
Okay. Are there any more questions? No? Okay. Okay, so thank you, Professor Malynovska, Jaroszewicz, and Dr. Gürsoy for coming. This was a very informative and very interesting panel, and you can access our panel. We will, I forgot to say, we will put this on YouTube. And we hope to see you in future panels and future scientific collaborations. Hopefully this is, the, beginning of our many collaborations such as this.
Thank you very much thank you for all participants. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Aydin. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. It was a pleasure to meet you. Yeah, bye.
It was a pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.